One peaceful afternoon, a 9-year-old girl asked her mother for permission to go out and play with the neighbors, promising to be back for dinner. But that day, the door closed, marking the last time the mother saw her daughter. The person who took her life wasn't a stranger, but a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Even more horrifying, after committing the brutal act, the perpetrator calmly returned home and wrote in her diary, "Feeling great. Okay, I have to go to church now. LOL." Welcome, everyone. Today, we will unravel the shocking case, the teenage monster, Alyssa Bustamante.
How did she kill her?
She died.
How did she die? 9-year-old girls don't just die.
We were messing her out. Then she fell back and hit her head.
Was her throat cut?
Yeah.
Take your time.
It is the visceral sound of her grandmother sobbing uncontrollably, her voice cracking with pure panic and horror, as she realizes the granddaughter she lovingly raised is a cold-blooded murderer. To understand how this chilling confession shook the core of everyone involved, we must travel back to 2009. Our setting is the picturesque town of St. Martins, Missouri. This is the epitome of rural, small-town America. With a population of just over 1,000 residents, it was the kind of tight-knit community where secrets were scarce and everyone knew everyone else's name. It was the sort of idyllic place where children rode their bikes freely through the sprawling woods, and families routinely went to sleep without ever bothering to lock their front doors at night. St. Martins was supposed to be a peaceful sanctuary, completely shielded from the violent crimes of the outside world. No one could have ever predicted that a predator was already hiding in plain sight, living right inside their neighborhood. The illusion of safety was about to be shattered forever.
Do you want to drink water? I think you dug the hole ahead of time. Because you knew you were going to kill him. I think you tried to dig the hole, like I said. You realized it was too hard to dig down that far.
The sun was beginning its slow descent on Wednesday, October 21, 2009, casting long, golden shadows across the quiet neighborhood of St. Martins. Inside the Olton home, the atmosphere was domestic and peaceful. 9-year-old Elizabeth was sitting at the dining room table, excitedly practicing her lines for an upcoming school musical. She was a bright, sweet child, the kind of girl who loved pink dresses, Hannah Montana, and playing make-believe. Her mother, Patty, was busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the family. It was an ordinary evening, filled with the comforting routines of a loving household. Around 5 p.m., the tranquility was interrupted by a soft knock at the front door. Standing on the porch was 6-year-old Emma Bustamante, a neighbor who lived just 4 houses down. Emma and Elizabeth were close friends, often spending hours playing together in each other's yards. "Can Elizabeth come out and play in the woods with me for a little while?" Emma pleaded, her young eyes wide with anticipation. Patty hesitated. Dinner was almost ready, and the late October sky was already beginning to dim. Furthermore, Elizabeth had a deep-seated fear of the dark. The woods behind their homes were vast, stretching for 60 acres, and not a place to be wandering after sunset. "It's getting late." Patty began, her maternal instinct urging her to keep her daughter close. But the girls were persistent, their voices blending in a chorus of eager begging. They promised they wouldn't go far and wouldn't be long. Looking at Elizabeth's hopeful face, Patty's resolve softened. It was a fateful decision, born entirely out of love and a desire to see her daughter happy. She wanted Elizabeth to enjoy the last remnants of daylight with her friend. "All right." Patty finally conceded, offering a warm but firm warning. "But listen to me, Elizabeth. You must be home by 6 p.m. sharp for dinner. The sun will be setting soon, and you know how you don't like the dark." Not a minute later, understand. "Yes."
Mom,
I'll be back on time, I promise! Elizabeth beamed, her face lighting up with joy. With a quick hug, the two little girls bounded down the driveway, their laughter ringing out in the cool autumn air. Patty watched them go, feeling a twinge of unease but trusting her daughter to keep her word. After all, Elizabeth was a rule follower, especially when it came to avoiding the dark. She turned back to the kitchen, the aroma of dinner filling the air, unaware that the ticking of the clock had just become a countdown. The innocent playdate she had just permitted was the beginning of a nightmare from which her family would never wake up. The door had closed, and with it, the last moment Patty would ever see her sweet Elizabeth alive. The clock on the Olton family's kitchen wall ticked mercilessly, each second feeling heavier than the last. 6 p.m. came and went, bringing with it the encroaching autumn darkness that 9-year-old Elizabeth feared so deeply. By 6:15 p.m., the house remained agonizingly quiet. There was no sound of small footsteps on the porch, no cheerful voice calling out from the hallway. Patty's maternal instincts, initially just a mild flutter of unease, rapidly morphed into a suffocating, full-blown panic. Elizabeth was a strict rule follower. She would never willfully stay out in the dark. Trembling, Patty grabbed her cell phone and dialed her daughter's number. It rang over and over, a hollow sound that eventually slipped straight to voicemail. She called again. Still nothing. Desperation clawing at her throat, Patty dialed the Bustamante residence, desperately praying for a simple, innocent explanation. Patty, Karen, is Elizabeth at your house? She's past her curfew. She was supposed to be home at 6. Karen, Patty, what are you talking about? What Elizabeth? She hasn't been over to my house all afternoon. Actually, Emma has just been playing alone upstairs in her room this whole time. In that single, terrifying moment, Patty's entire world fractured. If Elizabeth wasn't with Emma, where on earth was she? Within an hour, the quiet, idyllic streets of St. Martin's were transformed into a frantic staging ground. A massive, desperate search operation was immediately launched. Over 300 local volunteers poured out of their homes, armed with heavy flashlights and sheer willpower, plunging into the dense, 60-acre woods behind the neighborhood. Law enforcement swiftly descended upon the area, deploying specialized K-9 units to track the little girl's scent, while police helicopters equipped with thermal imaging swept relentlessly overhead. The dark, sprawling forest became a chaotic sea of sweeping light beams and desperate voices, all shouting Elizabeth's name into the freezing night air.
An intense search is underway in mid-Missouri for this 9-year-old girl. Elizabeth Olton was last seen leaving a friend's house about 6:15 p.m. Wednesday night. She was on foot, but she never arrived at her home just 4 blocks. The sheriff says the search is focusing on a section of woods which police have narrowed by triangulating Elizabeth's cell phone location. However, the battery has now died. Also, the search is being hampered by an uneven terrain, high brush, and soaking weather. No Amber Alert has been issued for Elizabeth because there's no evidence of an abduction or foul play.
I just want my little sister at home safely and...
Right now, she's listed as an endangered missing person. Myra Lopez, The Associated Press.
Investigators urgently contacted the cell phone provider to trace the missing girl. They discovered that Elizabeth's phone was still pinging, its signal buried deep within that very forest. But just as search teams began to zero in on the precise location, the phone battery died, plunging the investigation back into literal and metaphorical darkness. As the sleepless night dragged on, searchers stumbled upon a discovery that chilled them to the bone: a freshly dug hole hidden amidst the thick brush. It was perfectly rectangular, ominously resembling a shallow grave, and its dimensions were perfectly sized for a small child. Yet, terrifyingly, it was completely empty. Simultaneously, investigators began re-interviewing the neighbors, focusing closely on 6-year-old Emma. Under gentle but persistent questioning, the little girl's initial story began to fracture. The innocent claim of playing alone quickly unraveled, revealing a much darker, hidden detail. Emma innocently disclosed that she hadn't gone to Elizabeth's house on her own accord. She had been explicitly instructed to fetch Elizabeth by her 15-year-old half-sister, Alyssa. Furthermore, Emma revealed that Alyssa had joined them outside, only to later send Emma back inside the house alone, leaving the teenager completely alone with the 9-year-old. Suddenly, the spotlight of the frantic investigation pivoted away from the theory of a random stranger abduction, sharply illuminating the shadowy, silent figure of the teenage girl right next door. The cold-blooded web of deceit was finally beginning to untangle.
The last time I talked to her was about 2 days before everything occurred, and we were talking about a Halloween party that I was going to have, and she was telling me that she was going to come down and stuff, but then she kind of changed her mind, and she's like, well, maybe you can come up to my house, and I was like, oh, well, that would be fun, you know, and she started, you know, talking about how she wanted to go to this party with all these, like, drugs and stuff like that, and I'm like, well, I'm not into that sort of thing, you know, and she's like, well, I can just bring them to your house, and I have a little brother and sister, and I was like, I don't think that's a good idea, and then she started kind of getting angry, and that was pretty much it.
So this was weird. She hadn't talked about drugs or anything like that before?
She talked about different kinds, but I didn't know she went to, like, parties and stuff like that, because I would think that her grandparents would know. They're pretty strict, you know, so I thought it was kind of strange.
She lived with her grandparents?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, did she ever talk about wanting to hurt people?
No, just kind of in a joking manner, but not actually, like, well, at one specific time, it was on her birthday. I was at her party, and she kind of just took me off to the side randomly, and she's like, you know, I wonder what it would be like to kill somebody, because I guess she was mad at one of her friends there, but it just seemed kind of strange, but you wouldn't logically think one of your friends would kill somebody, you know.
As the intense spotlight of the investigation aggressively shifted, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante found herself sitting directly across from seasoned detectives inside a cold, sterile interrogation room. Despite the crushing pressure of a missing child investigation, her demeanor was unnervingly calm and collected. She presented a chilling facade of absolute innocence, coldly spinning a meticulously fabricated tale to explain away the mounting suspicious details. When asked about her movements that afternoon, she smoothly claimed she had merely been out for a leisurely walk in the woods and had to rescue her 6-year-old sister, Emma, who had supposedly fallen into a dense thorny bush.
Start from Wednesday morning. Let's just kind of start there.
Okay.
Walk me through from the time you woke up in the morning. You woke up in the morning and walk me through exactly what happened from there.
So I went to school,
Okay.
and I was there all day. And then I came home on the bus, and I got home around 3. And I just hung out in my room for a little while. And then I went for a walk around 5. And I was just walking around in the forest for a while. And I was supposed to take my little sister with me, but I ditched her because she's annoying.
Okay.
Yelling. So I went outside, and she was down in the ditch area. She was stuck in thorn bushes. So I went down there, and I helped her out. And she asked me why I was bleeding, because, you know, I found out on my period.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, don't tell me about that.
When investigators pressed her about the alarming drop of blood Emma had explicitly noticed on her pants, Alyssa didn't even flinch. She confidently lied, attributing the bloodstain to her menstrual cycle, a highly calculated excuse designed to make the interrogators uncomfortable, and quickly dropped the subject. But while Alyssa sat confidently weaving her deceitful web at the station, FBI agents were executing a thorough search warrant at the Bustamante home. When evidence officers opened the door to Alyssa's bedroom, they stepped into a literal house of horrors. The walls were covered in deeply disturbing, chaotic writings, some of which chillingly appeared to be written in actual blood. Dark, violent sketches littered the messy room, including a crude, deranged drawing of a human figure with severe slash marks across its face and arms, with the name of her little sister, Emma, written ominously right next to it. Amidst this macabre scene, investigators uncovered the ultimate key to solving the case: Alyssa's personal diary. Flipping through pages filled with morbid teenage angst and escalating homicidal fantasies, they stopped abruptly at the entry dated October 21st, the exact day little Elizabeth vanished. The entire entry had been frantically and violently scribbled out with heavy blue ink. rendering it completely unreadable to the naked eye. However, modern forensic technology easily bypassed this crude attempt at a cover-up. Using a specialized UV black light, laboratory technicians illuminated the page, peering right through the blue ink to reveal a deeply sadistic, cruel confession hidden beneath. "I just fucking killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. It was amazing." Armed with this irrefutable, undeniable proof, the lead detective re-entered the interrogation room. He played his final, devastating card, staring directly into the eyes of the remorseless teenager and revealing that they had found her diary and read her final, blood-soaked entry. In that exact instant, the psychological dam broke. Alyssa's impenetrable, icy facade completely shattered. Confronted with her own horrific written words, the teenage killer finally confessed to the unimaginable. She admitted to using her own 6-year-old sister as innocent bait to lure 9-year-old Elizabeth out of the safety of her home.
Why don't we start with what happened? Did you get home from school at 3:30? Do you want to sit by her?
I went in the forest. Like I said, and Elizabeth was in there.
Do you have an extra one for her? Yes. Elizabeth was there in the forest?
Yes.
Was she alone?
Yeah.
Okay.
We decided to go hang out because it was a nice day. We were just messing.
Take your time.
We were just messing around. And she fell. And she died. And I didn't know what to do. So I burned her body. Because I didn't want to get in trouble.
At the creek bed?
Yes.
How did you burn her?
I just got a bunch of wood and started a fire and burned her body.
She confessed to guiding the trusting little girl deep into the isolated woods, where she ruthlessly strangled her, stabbed her multiple times in the chest, and completely severed her throat, before coldly pushing her lifeless body into a shallow dirt grave she had meticulously dug days in advance. The mystery was solved, but the horrifying truth left an entire community permanently scared. The dark reality of what human beings are capable of can be incredibly difficult to process, but uncovering these psychological depths is crucial to understanding the minds of predators. If you found this deep dive into criminal psychology compelling and want to help us shed light on more shocking cases, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Your support allows us to keep bringing you these intense, thoroughly researched true crime investigations. Join our community today and stay safe out there!
This video of Alyssa Alyssa Bustamante in court back in 2009. You may recall she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder charges for the death of Elizabeth Alton. The 9-year-old Cole County girl was found in a shallow grave back in 2009. Investigators say Bustamante strangled and stabbed Alton. In today's testimony, Alton's mother took the stand and she called Bustamante a, quote, evil monster, and asked the judge to consider the sentence as though it were the judge's child who had been murdered. Testimony will continue tomorrow. The judge could sentence Bustamante to life in prison without parole.
The most haunting question that lingers over this tragic case is not how the crime was committed, but why. Why would a seemingly normal 15-year-old girl inflict such unimaginable, intimate brutality on a sweet, defenseless 9-year-old neighbor? The answer, chillingly provided by Alyssa Bustamante herself, places her into a rare and terrifying category of criminal psychology, the thrill killer. When investigators directly asked for her motive, she casually stated, "I just wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone." This was not a crime born out of a personal vendetta, anger, or financial gain. It was driven purely by a morbid curiosity and a craving for physiological arousal. Thrill killers experience a massive, narcotic-like surge of adrenaline and a twisted sense of euphoria when they take a human life. This physiological high was explicitly documented in her diary, where she described the immediate aftermath of the gruesome murder as amazing and pretty enjoyable. For Alyssa, the act of murder was entirely recreational. A deep dive into her interrogation footage reveals glaring psychopathy traits. Throughout hours of grueling questioning, Alyssa displayed a disturbing, flat affect, a complete and utter absence of normal human emotion. When she recounted the gruesome details of the slaughter, her voice remained dead, detached, and chillingly conversational. Interestingly, psychological profilers note her frequent use of hedging phrases like "I think" or "I believe" when describing her actions. This is a recognized psychological tactic used by psychopaths to artificially mimic the natural cadence of human emotions they cannot actually comprehend or feel. When she finally broke down and cried in the interrogation room, her tears were highly revealing. She did not shed a single tear of guilt, remorse, or sorrow for little Elizabeth. Instead, her breakdown occurred only when the crushing reality set in that she had been caught and her own freedom was over. They were tears of pure self-pity. To understand this profound lack of empathy, we must look at her underlying psychological need for power and control. Alyssa's early childhood was highly chaotic, marked by severe parental neglect, substance misuse in the home, and profound instability. Children who grow up feeling completely powerless in a turbulent, unpredictable environment sometimes seek to establish absolute control in incredibly destructive ways. For Alyssa, this desperate need for dominance manifested in increasingly dark behaviors, self-harming by cutting her own skin, sadistically tricking her younger twin brothers into touching a live electric fence for her own amusement, and finally, escalating to the ultimate exertion of power. Elizabeth was a target of convenience, a fragile, trusting, and physically weaker vessel for Alyssa to exert absolute, godlike control over life and death. During her trial, the defense desperately attempted to paint the murder as a spontaneous, tragic manic episode triggered by a recent dosage increase of her antidepressant medication, Prozac. However, forensic evidence aggressively dismantles this narrative of an impulsive, medication-induced psychological break. This was a crime of cold-blooded premeditation. The most undeniable proof of her calculation lies buried in the dirt of the 60-acre woods. 5 full days before she ever lured Elizabeth away from the safety of her porch, Alyssa skipped school, went into the forest, and meticulously dug 2 shallow, child-sized graves. Digging through hard earth and roots requires immense physical effort and time. It is not the action of someone experiencing a fleeting, impulsive breakdown. It was a deeply conscious, premeditated execution. She had a clear, sadistic goal, patiently laid out the groundwork, and coldly waited to spring her deadly trap. The gavel coming down on the Alyssa Bustamante case did not immediately bring an end to the nightmare. Rather, it opened the door to a complex legal battle and a deeply disturbing cultural phenomenon. From the moment the horrifying details of the murder were brought to light, the Missouri justice system was forced to make a decisive and uncompromising ruling. Because of the sheer brutality, the undeniable premeditation, and the sadistic nature of the crime, the court determined that the juvenile system was entirely unequipped to handle a predator of this magnitude. Therefore, despite being only 15 years old at the time of the murder, Alyssa was officially certified to stand trial as a full adult. As the high-profile trial loomed, her defense attorneys engaged in intense legal maneuvering, fully aware that a first-degree murder conviction could result in life behind bars without the possibility of parole. In a highly controversial move that sparked immense public debate, Alyssa eventually accepted a plea deal in 2012. She pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder, along with an additional charge of armed criminal action. Consequently, she was handed a life sentence, but crucially, this plea agreement left a slight window open, the possibility of future parole. That controversial window of hope nearly cracked wide open over a decade later. Due to a sudden shift in state legislation intended to give reformed juvenile offenders a second chance, a legal loophole allowed Alyssa to unexpectedly qualify for an early parole hearing in the summer of 2024, after serving only 15 years. The very idea that a cold-blooded thrill killer could walk free so soon sent shockwaves of outrage and agonizing grief through Elizabeth's family and the local community. However, driven by the family's tireless advocacy, Missouri lawmakers swiftly intervened. They passed Senate Bill 754, a strict new law specifically designed to block early parole for serious juvenile offenders convicted of second-degree murder. Thanks to this swift legislative action, her highly publicized 2024 attempt to secure early release was successfully thwarted, ensuring she remained behind bars where she belonged. Yet, while the physical prison doors remained firmly shut, a much darker, unrestricted narrative was unfolding in the unregulated shadows of the internet. In a twisted, sickening display of modern social media culture, Alyssa Bustamante bizarrely transformed into a macabre, internet idol for a highly deviant subculture of teenagers. Across various digital platforms, disturbing online fan clubs dedicated to the convicted murderer began to emerge. Deluded sympathizers created fake social media profiles pretending to be her, shared romanticized narratives about her troubled past, and most appallingly, drew and circulated stylized fan art of the teenage killer. This dark side of the internet highlights a deeply unsettling psychological detachment from reality, where true crime is consumed as mere edgy entertainment, completely stripped of its real-world tragedy. The glamorization of a ruthless predator is not just a toxic internet trend, it is a profound, devastating insult to the memory of sweet, innocent 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten. It serves as a terrifying reminder that while the justice system can physically lock away a monster, it cannot entirely eradicate the sinister, twisted fascination that society's darkest corners hold for the very evil that destroyed a family. As we reach the conclusion of this devastating story, I want to step back from the forensic evidence, the police transcripts, and the courtroom battles to speak with you on a much more personal level. For me personally, the most profoundly haunting aspect of this entire case is not the gruesome, calculated method of the murder itself, nor is it the chillingly flat affect Alyssa displayed in that cold interrogation room. No, the true horror lies in the absolute, heartbreaking betrayal of pure innocence and trust. Just close your eyes and imagine the scene for a moment. A sweet, trusting 9-year-old girl, her head filled with dreams of princesses and playtime, eagerly holding the hand of her older teenage neighbor as they walk into the autumn woods. She followed her killer willingly, her heart fluttering with the innocent excitement of being promised a special surprise. She didn't scream or run away at first because she felt entirely safe. We are conditioned by movies, media, and urban legends to teach our children to fear the boogeyman, the faceless stranger lurking in the dark alleyway, the suspicious vehicle parked at the end of the street. But this case shatters that comforting illusion. It forces us to confront a terrifying reality. Demons do not always hide in the shadows. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator in a child's life wears the familiar, smiling face of the friendly neighbor living right next door. This tragedy also serves as a stark, urgent cautionary tale for parents, educators, and communities everywhere. It forces us to look closely at the psychological warning signs that were flashing bright red long before little Elizabeth's life was stolen. We must talk about the red flags, in teenagers that are far too often dismissed, siren indicating a profound lack of empathy and a dangerous escalation of violent urges. Similarly, while self-harm is frequently a tragic cry for help indicating severe depression or trauma, in the context of other violent ideations, it can represent a dangerous desensitization to pain and blood. Furthermore, we must be incredibly vigilant about our children's digital footprints. Alyssa's social media profiles were littered with dark poetry about murder, images of self-mutilation, and an openly declared obsession with death. In today's highly connected digital age, parents absolutely cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the content their children consume and create online. We must stop dismissing violent online posts, disturbing drawings, or morbid jokes as just edgy attention-seeking behavior. A child repeatedly expressing a desire to kill or cause harm is a critical psychiatric emergency. It is an uncomfortable, difficult conversation to have, but intervening early and taking these violent threats seriously is the only way to prevent another family from enduring the unimaginable, lifelong grief that the Olten family lives with every single day. The aftermath of this case leaves us grappling with profound moral and legal dilemmas. It forces us to look at our justice system and ask incredibly difficult questions about accountability, age, and true evil. We recognize that a teenager's brain is not fully developed, but how do we weigh that biological fact against the cold, calculated premeditation of digging a grave days in advance? This brings me to a question I want to pose to all of you. What do you think about Alyssa's sentence? Do you believe she should ever be allowed to walk free in society again? Is the modern legal practice of reducing sentences and offering early parole for juvenile offenders truly fair to the victims and their families when the crime is this cold-blooded, calculated, and malicious? Please take a moment to share your perspectives and leave your thoughts in the comments section below. This is a complex debate that truly needs our collective voice. And finally, if you found this deep dive into the psychological dark corners of this case valuable, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what allows us to continue unearthing the truth and analyzing the minds of offenders in future cases. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and see you next time! In 1985, 15-year-old Christy left her home to buy a chocolate bar and never returned. A half-eaten piece of candy left on the grass was the sole evidence of a perfect, witness-free crime. The dead-end investigation drove an innocent man to the brink, stripping him of his entire life savings and reputation. Police scoured every corner for 30 years, yet no one suspected that the true killer had never even been on their radar. Who was he? And how did a legal loophole allow this monster to roam free? Glen Ellen, Illinois in the summer of 1985 was the epitome of Midwestern suburban tranquility. It was the kind of community where doors were left unlocked and children roamed the neighborhoods freely until the streetlights flickered on. At the heart of this idyllic town was 15-year-old Christy Wesselman. She was a bright, popular, and incredibly sweet-natured teenager, actively involved in sports and proudly serving as the vice president of her class. She had a vibrant spirit and shared a deeply loving, close-knit relationship with her family. Sunday, July 21 was meant to be a perfectly ordinary and relaxing day. Christy and her mother had planned a cozy mother-daughter afternoon, looking forward to spending hours lounging in their living room to watch a marathon of old movies. Just as they were getting settled, Christy had a sudden craving for a snack. She decided to take a quick walk to the local Jewel supermarket to buy a soda and a chocolate bar to share. The store was only a few blocks away, a brief walk she had taken safely countless times before. As she headed for the door, her mother called out warmly from inside the house, "Be careful, princess. I love you." Christy flashed a smile and cheerfully replied, "I'm just running to Jewel to grab a chocolate bar and I'll be right back." "Go ahead and pick out a movie first!" The front door clicked shut. Neither of them knew that this entirely mundane exchange would be their final goodbye.
July 21st, 1985 will haunt me forever. My daughter Christy and I were going to watch old movies and relax at home. I asked Christy to go to the store to buy a candy bar before we settled in. I watched her go out the door and said, "Be careful, Princess, I love you." Little did I know that those were the last words I would ever say to my daughter. Our lives were changed forever on that date. Christy had been killed. Her body was found the next morning, and this was the beginning of our nightmare.
When minutes stretched into hours and Christy failed to return, a creeping dread settled over her home. The frantic search that began that evening tragically ended the following day. Police officers, retracing her likely route, decided to check a popular shortcut, a narrow, well-worn dirt path cutting through a vacant field of tall grass that local kids frequently used to walk to the shopping plaza. There, pulled just a few yards off the trail and hidden by the dense summer overgrowth, they found Christy's lifeless body.
That went unsolved for 32 years.
This is where the narrative shifts from a heartbreaking suburban tragedy to a deeply chilling paradox. When investigators examined the crime scene, they were immediately confronted with a baffling array of blind spots and terrifying logical questions. Christy had been subjected to an unspeakably brutal assault. She was stabbed 8 times and physically violated. Yet, the geography of this horrific violence defies all logic. The crime scene was not isolated in some remote, desolate wilderness. It was nestled right on the edge of a busy residential area. The spot where she was ambushed was a mere 60 yards away from an operating gas station where an attendant was working a full shift. Even more perplexing, just dozens of yards away from where Christy took her last breath, a local family was outside hosting a lively backyard barbecue. Despite the sheer proximity to so many people on a clear summer afternoon, not a single person reported seeing anything suspicious. Not a single person heard a scream, a struggle, or a cry for help. How does an attack of such staggering ferocity occur essentially in the town's backyard without making a single sound? This paradoxical, deafening silence would haunt the investigators, setting the stage for a mystery that would take 3 agonizing decades to unravel.
At Christy's funeral, I silently promised her I would never stop trying to find the person who killed her. I didn't know that that was going to be a lifetime process.
When investigators combed through the overgrown grass at the crime scene, the physical evidence they uncovered painted a chilling, intimate picture of the killer's methodology. The most haunting item left behind was not a weapon or a footprint, but a simple, half-eaten chocolate bar lying near the dirt path. Psychologically, this mundane object spoke volumes. It indicated that Christy had been walking home casually, enjoying her candy, her mind completely at ease in a neighborhood she trusted. To investigators, this confirmed a terrifying reality. She was the victim of a blitz attack. This was a sudden, overwhelming, and hyper-violent ambush executed with such lightning speed that the teenager had absolutely zero time to process the threat, fight back, or even let out a scream for help. Adding to the mystery of the scene was a glaring absence on the victim's body. Christy's family noted that the teenager had left the house wearing a cherished pearl ring on her finger, but the jewelry was nowhere to be found. This missing item raised deeply disturbing questions about the perpetrator's profile and psychology. Did the attacker steal the ring merely to pawn it for quick cash, or did it represent something much darker? In the realm of criminal profiling, taking a piece of personal jewelry often acts as a morbid trophy, a psychological signature frequently utilized by serial offenders who keep physical tokens to mentally relive their crimes long after the act. The most crucial piece of evidence, however, was biological. The medical examiner successfully collected the perpetrator's seminal fluid from the victim's body. Today, discovering the killer's DNA at a crime scene would essentially mean an open and shut case. But the year was 1985, and forensic DNA profiling was in its absolute infancy. To local law enforcement at the time, this microscopic biological blueprint was essentially an alien language. They literally held the precise, irrefutable identity of the monster in their hands, yet humanity completely lacked the scientific dictionary required to translate it. The sample was carefully preserved and stored away in an evidence locker, a silent witness condemned to wait in the dark for years until technology could finally catch up. Left with no immediate scientific answers, the detectives were forced to rely heavily on behavioral profiling and geographic logic. Standing at the crime scene, analyzing the dense terrain and the sheer stealth required to pull off such an attack entirely unnoticed, investigators formed a rigid hypothesis. They deduced that the killer absolutely had to be a local resident. He had to be a predator intimately familiar with the neighborhood's daily rhythms, the exact blind spots of this specific, hidden shortcut, and the routines of the local children. With that profile firmly cemented in their minds, the police pivoted their entire investigation toward the immediate community. The grueling process of scrutinizing every man in the surrounding neighborhood had officially begun, setting the stage for a tragic, tunnel-visioned misdirection. Convinced that the killer was a phantom hiding in plain sight, the detectives developed severe tunnel vision. They needed a local suspect, and their gaze soon locked onto a 34-year-old man named Dana Henry. Henry's geographic connection to the crime scene made him the perfect, convenient target. The backyard of his mother's house sat a mere 100 yards from the dense grass where Christie's body was discovered. In the minds of desperate investigators, such close proximity equated to undeniable opportunity. When detectives initially questioned him, Henry steadfastly denied any involvement. However, the situation rapidly escalated from a routine inquiry to a hostile standoff when police demanded a biological sample for DNA testing. Henry, standing on his principles and constitutional rights, adamantly refused to provide his blood or saliva. To the police, this refusal was the ultimate red flag. They applied a flawed, yet common, psychological logic. What is the natural reaction of an innocent person? If you have absolutely nothing to hide, you cooperate to clear your name. In the high-stakes psychological game of criminal profiling, Henry's stubborn defiance convinced the police that he was a predator harboring a terrifying secret. Determined to break him, the local justice system bared its darkest teeth. The police secured a court order, and when Henry still resisted, the coercion became physical and deeply humiliating.
Been a whole nother guy since. I don't like Dana Henry anymore. How weird is that?
At one point, Henry says investigators stripped his clothes off and put him in a jail cell until he agreed to give a blood and saliva sample for DNA testing. He says police never told him why he was a suspect. His mother's backyard was about 100 yards from where Wesselman's body was discovered.
They never read me my rights, so I guess that means I don't have any.
He says he spent about $50,000 on lawyers and ended up losing his house. He now lives in LaSalle County and says the cloud of suspicion has cost him relationships with friends and even family.
Eventually, broken by the immense psychological pressure and the sheer degradation of being held in a jail cell completely naked, Henry reluctantly surrendered his DNA. Weeks later, the lab results returned, echoing with a deafening truth: it was not a match. Dana Henry was scientifically and unequivocally innocent. Yet, exoneration in a laboratory did not equal exoneration in reality. The police simply dropped him and moved on, offering no public clearance and absolutely no apology. They left Henry to navigate the smoking ruins of his existence alone.
Tore his whole life apart. First of all, people automatically start thinking, oh, well, if the government or the, county thinks that you're a potential suspect, then I'm sure he lost a lot of friends, and then the expense of having to go to court and go through everything.
The severe stigma of being the prime suspect in a child's gruesome murder turned him into a permanent pariah. Friends vanished overnight, and even family members turned their backs. To defend himself against the relentless machinery of the state, Henry was forced to spend upwards of $50,000 on legal fees, an astronomical sum in the late 1980s. He had to mortgage his house, which he ultimately lost to foreclosure. The blind, prejudiced pursuit of a convenient suspect served only as a devastating red herring. It allowed the true monster to slip further into the shadows while successfully obliterating the finances, the reputation, and the very soul of an innocent man.
Henry's a former military police officer who served in West Germany. He says if he had run across the attack as it was happening, he He would have been willing to die defending Wesselman. He says he came to court yesterday to express his sympathy to the family.
When a murder investigation violently hits a brick wall, the initial adrenaline of the police manhunt slowly metastasizes into a unique, agonizing psychological torture for the victim's family. For the Wesselman family, the waking nightmare of losing 15-year-old Christy was compounded by a cruel, secondary victimization not by the killer but by the twisted shadows of the public. Starting in late 1985, a mysterious figure began actively injecting himself into the family's profound grief. An anonymous man, later identified as Willis Wilson, relentlessly bombarded Christie's relatives with supposedly confidential tips and fabricated leads regarding the murderer's true identity. For 4 grueling years, he spun elaborate, far-fetched webs of deceit, forcing the police to waste precious resources chasing phantoms. What drives a person to torment a grieving family? In the dark realm of criminal psychology, these individuals are often driven by a pathological need for relevance, power, and attention. By artificially attaching themselves to a high-profile tragedy, they temporarily elevate their own mundane existence. They feed like parasites off the desperate hope of the victims, watching from afar as the family and detectives scramble, only to be crushed when the lead inevitably evaporates into dust. It wasn't until the family was pushed to the brink of emotional collapse in 1989 that a judge finally issued a strict restraining order, shutting down Wilson's twisted game of psychological terror. Decades evaporated into thin air. The original detectives packed up their desks and retired. The thick case files were relegated to basement archives, and the rest of the world seemingly moved on. Yet, for a mother whose child was stolen, time does not heal, it merely calcifies the pain. In 2011, 26 agonizing years after the brutal ambush, a desperate Jeanine Wesselman appeared on television, making one final, heart-wrenching plea to the public. Looking directly into the camera, her voice breaking, she pleaded,
"There's a man out there who thinks he got away with murder. Please help us take away his dream. He stole all of Christie's. Today, my most frequent prayer is, God, please give the man who killed Christy what he deserves. I hate him less today, but my desire for justice will be with me always."
She didn't have new DNA breakthroughs to tout. Instead, she and the police clung to the only physical anchor left in the void: Christie's missing pearl ring. By thrusting this detail back into the media ecosystem, investigators banked on a specific set of logical deductions. A unique piece of heirloom jewelry does not simply vanish from the face of the earth. Where was the pearl ring after a quarter of a century? Did the killer pawn it for quick cash in a neighboring state? Did he arrogantly gift it to an oblivious wife or a secret lover, presenting a dead girl's treasure as a romantic token? Or, perhaps the most terrifying hypothesis of all, had the monster already died of old age or an accident, taking the ring and his dark, bloody secret with him to the grave? Despite the deeply emotional televised appeal, the phones at the police precinct remained agonizingly silent. No one recognized the ring. No one came forward with a deathbed confession. The leads completely and utterly dried up. The tragic, terminal disease of the cold case had fully set in. The investigation was no longer just stalling, it was officially frozen in ice. To the detectives, the media, and the community, the ghost of Christy Wesselman was destined to wander that overgrown dirt path forever. Nobody had a single shred of hope left. The perfect crime, it seemed, had truly been committed.
You may have heard something. You may have been wondering about something that happened about the time that Christy died. You haven't called the sheriff's department because you're not sure. Forget being not sure. Let the detectives decide. We need your help to close Christy's case and give closure to my family. Thank you.
For 30 years, the murder of Christy Wesselman was a tragic ghost story whispered in Glen Ellen, a thick binder of fading reports gathering dust on a precinct shelf. But while human memories fade and original detectives retire, science possesses a terrifyingly perfect, uncompromising memory. By 2015, forensic technology had evolved into a state-of-the-art digital dragnet. The microscopic biological blueprint extracted from that overgrown field in 1985 had been uploaded into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database, patiently running complex algorithms in the dark. Then, on an otherwise unremarkable day, the system finally screamed. Inside the cold, sterile walls of the state crime lab, a technician stared at a computer monitor in absolute disbelief. The machine had just registered a flawless 1 in a billion hit. He immediately grabbed the receiver and dialed the lead investigator's desk. "Bus, the CODIS system just flashed a red alert," the lab technician said, his voice trembling with a potent mix of adrenaline and shock. "The 1985 semen sample from the Wesselman crime scene. We have a 100% match." On the other end of the line, the detective gripped the phone, his knuckles turning white as 3 decades of institutional frustration surged to the surface. "Who is it?" he demanded, his voice tight with anticipation. "Which guy in the Glen Ellen area?" There was a heavy, deafening pause before the technician replied, "No sir, he's not from there. His name is Michael Jones. He's a 62-year-old man living all the way down in Champaign. And boss, I've checked the archives twice. This name has never appeared in a single one of our case records for the past 30 years. That singular revelation sent a seismic shockwave through the entire investigative foundation of the case. It was deeply, chillingly illogical. For 3 decades, law enforcement had operated on the absolute bedrock assumption that the perpetrator was deeply embedded in the community. They had interrogated local men, scarred the town's offender registries, and even destroyed the life of an innocent neighbor, Dana Henry, based entirely on the certainty that the killer lived among them. But the truth was far more terrifying. How did Michael Jones manage to slip completely through the cracks of a massive, multi-decade manhunt?
Helping tonight a sentence in a cold case murder in DuPage County. After admitting his guilt, Michael Jones will spend 80 years in prison for the murder of 15-year-old Christy Wesselman, who was sexually assaulted then stabbed to death back in 1985. Her family spoke out after the judge handed down that sentence.
The answer lay in the terrifying reality of his geographic footprint. Champaign, Illinois, was located approximately 150 miles south of Glen Ellen. Jones had absolutely no ties to Christie's neighborhood, no local friends, and no reason to be on any detective's radar. Investigators soon uncovered that Jones was an avid motorcyclist who frequently took long, solitary road trips across the state to visit relatives in Chicago. Glen Ellen was merely a quiet town on the outskirts of his highway route. On that fateful July afternoon in 1985, Jones was nothing more than a violent transient passing through. The foundational, local suspect hypothesis, the very premise that had driven the investigation into a brick wall in Part 2, was completely and utterly shattered. Jones didn't possess intimate knowledge of the neighborhood's blind spots. He was simply a predator of opportunity. He was cruising by, saw a vulnerable 15-year-old girl walking alone near a field, and the darkest impulses of a beast took over. He struck randomly, committed an unspeakable atrocity in a matter of minutes, got back on his motorcycle, and vanished down the interstate before the police were even called. He was a phantom hunting at random, leaving behind a devastating mystery that almost outlived the very detectives trying to solve it. Once the name Michael Jones flashed across the screen, investigators scrambled to uncover how this phantom had finally been dragged into the light. The breakthrough did not come from a brilliant deduction or a sudden confession regarding the 1985 murder. Instead, it emerged from the monster's own malignant, inescapable nature. In 2015, 30 years after he slaughtered Christy Wesselman, Jones's inherent rage boiled over once again in his home in Champaign. He viciously assaulted his wife in a domestic violence incident. However, unlike the silenced victims of his past, his wife made the terrifying but profoundly courageous decision to pick up the phone and report him to the police. Her bravery led to his immediate arrest. Due to an Illinois state law passed in the early 2000s, a law explicitly designed to mandate DNA swabbing for individuals arrested on felony charges, a routine buccal swab was taken from Jones and uploaded into the FBI's CODIS database. It was this seemingly unrelated domestic dispute that finally provided the biological key to unlocking a 3-decade-old murder. As detectives frantically pulled Jones's criminal history, The profile of an absolute apex predator began to materialize. The true horror of the case was not just that they had caught a killer, but that the justice system had already known exactly who he was. In the late 1970s, well before Christie was ever targeted, Jones had already demonstrated his capacity for extreme violence. According to court records, he orchestrated a terrifying and calculated attack against a 27-year-old woman. Using his car as a weapon, he deliberately rammed the woman off her bicycle. While she was disoriented and injured, he drew a firearm, kidnapped her at gunpoint, and subjected her to a horrific physical violation before abandoning her in a hospital parking lot. He was subsequently caught, tried, and an independent psychiatrist determined he was fully aware of his monstrous actions. The judge handed down a sentence that should have kept the public safe. Michael Jones was condemned to serve 10 to 20 years in a maximum security state penitentiary. This is where the narrative shifts from a triumphant detective story into an infuriating indictment of a broken legal system. If the justice system had simply enforced its own mandate, the tragedy of July 23, 1985, would be a physical impossibility. But in a catastrophic failure of the parole board, Jones was granted early release for good behavior. He served a mere 6 years of his sentence and was thrust back onto the streets in 1983 as a free man. The chilling mathematical logic of this systemic failure is impossible to ignore. Jones was released 2 years before he crossed paths with Christie. If the parole board had not shown inexplicable leniency to an armed, predatory rapist, if 10 to 20 years had actually meant a minimum of a decade behind bars, Michael Jones would have been sitting in a locked concrete cell on that fateful summer afternoon. He would never have been riding his motorcycle through Glen Ellyn. Christie Wesselman would have walked to the Jewel supermarket, bought her chocolate bar, and walked safely back to her living room to watch movies with her mother. The sickening reality that hung over the police precinct was that Christie's death was not just a random tragedy. It was a directly preventable consequence of a legal loophole that prioritized a monster's freedom over a child's life. The resolution of the Christie Wesselman murder offers a profound, devastating reflection on the flawed mechanics of justice. When Michael Jones finally stood before a judge in 2018, the courtroom air was thick with a grief that had fermented for 33 agonizing years. But deeply intertwined with that sorrow was an undeniable, burning fury directed at the legal system itself. The 1983 parole board, blinded by bureaucratic checkboxes and superficial markers of good behavior, had unchained a violent apex predator after he served a mere 6 years for an armed kidnapping and unspeakable violence. In their reckless pursuit of leniency, the justice system had inadvertently drafted and signed a death warrant for an innocent 15-year-old girl. They traded a monster's freedom for a child's future. This time, however, the court ensured there would be no loopholes, no leniency, and absolutely no escape. At the 2018 sentencing, the judge looked down at the killer and delivered a crushing, uncompromising verdict: 80 years in a maximum security state penitentiary. While the law might not have explicitly labeled it a life sentence without the possibility of parole, the stark mathematics of the ruling guaranteed exactly that. Michael Jones's earliest eligibility for a parole hearing will arrive in the year 2095, at which point he would be an astonishing 142 years old. It was, in every practical sense, a biological death penalty. He is condemned to rot within a concrete cage, destined to draw his final breath surrounded by cold steel, as the heavy prison doors slammed shut on Michael Jones forever. The 3-decade saga left behind 3 echoing lessons that continue to serve as a stark warning for modern criminology. First, it is a chilling reminder to never judge a suspect based on emotional bias or circumstantial convenience. The complete destruction of Dana Henry, an innocent neighbor driven to financial ruin, public humiliation, and profound psychological trauma simply because he lived nearby and asserted his constitutional rights, proves that police tunnel vision and coercive interrogations are the true enemies of justice. Second, the case stands as a monumental testament to the absolute, inescapable power of forensic DNA. A predator might successfully outrun detectives, cross state lines, and blend seamlessly into normal society for decades, but science possesses an infallible, unforgiving memory. A microscopic trace of biological evidence left in the summer grass was powerful enough to reach across time and drag a monster into the light. Finally, it teaches us that while justice can be excruciatingly slow, agonizingly delayed by human error and technological limitations, it does not forget anyone. Yet, despite the ultimate triumph of science and the finality of the judge's gavel, there is a profoundly bitter aftertaste to this victory. Justice provides closure, but it does not rewind the clock. The narrative concludes not in the triumphant halls of a courthouse, but in the quiet, solemn grounds of St. Michael's Cemetery. Beneath the rustling leaves, a fresh bouquet of brightly colored flowers is gently laid against a weathered headstone. The monster has finally been erased from society, but beneath the earth, a mother's little princess remains forever 15, resting in peace at the end of a long, Bentonville, Arkansas, November 20, 2012. We teach our children to fear the stranger in the dark. But what if the monster doesn't lurk in the shadows? What if he lives next door on your quiet street? He was the trusted neighbor, the husband of a best friend. He was the man who tenderly carried a sleeping 6-year-old girl home and tucked her into bed. She innocently called him Uncle Zach. But by dawn, little Jersey Bridgman had vanished from her room. This isn't a story about a random break-in. It's a chilling warning that the deadliest predators are invited inside. Let's break the conventional rules of storytelling. We are not going to start at the beginning of this tragedy. We need to start with the present, with an agonizing legal circus that simply refuses to end. Fast forward to April 2024. The gavel strikes in an Arkansas courtroom, echoing with a definitive, satisfying thud. A judge has officially and firmly rejected Zachary Hawley's latest desperate attempt to overturn his death sentence. For over a decade, this convicted child killer has been fighting tooth and nail from a supermax prison for his own life, a right he brutally and mercilessly stripped away from 6-year-old Jersey Bridgman. His defense, a cowardly, regurgitated script blaming His Highness' actions on childhood trauma. His legal team painted a tragic picture of a man broken by an abusive upbringing and a severe substance-dependent mother, shamelessly weaponizing mental health as a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is a sickening display of evasion. Millions of people endure horrific, traumatic childhoods. They do not grow up to brutally assault and strangle a sleeping little girl. To use the pain of his own past to justify the ultimate destruction of an innocent child's future is the absolute pinnacle of cowardice. But if Zachary Hawley represents pure, unadulterated evil, the legal aftermath revealed a twist so profoundly grotesque that it defies human logic. To fully grasp this, we must look through the lens of criminal psychology expert Emma Kenney, who highlighted a detail so sickening it will leave you completely speechless. Enter Amanda Hawley. Amanda wasn't just Zachary's wife, she was Desiree's Jersey's mother's absolute best friend. In the immediate, chaotic hours after the murder, Amanda was the one who stood by Desiree's side. She held her, comforted her, and wept bitter tears over the unimaginable loss of little Jersey. She played the role of the devastated, supportive confidante to perfection. Yet, when the dust settled and the monster was locked away, the mask slipped. In a move that shocks the conscience, Amanda actively supported Zachary's appeals in 2019 and again in 2023. The woman who once cried alongside a grieving mother actually put her support behind legal arguments, demanding that her husband's conviction be vacated. Her reasoning: she audaciously agreed with the defense that the overwhelming evidence proving Zachary's guilt, the undeniable DNA, the chilling confession, should not have been allowed in court. Read that again. She wasn't arguing his innocence. She was arguing that the proof of his monstrosity should have been hidden on a legal technicality so he could walk free. For Desiree, a mother who had already endured the incomprehensible agony of burying her 6-year-old daughter, this was the second strike of the blade. The first stab came from the monster who took her child's breath. The second came from the best friend who decided that monster's life was worth protecting. It was a secondary, psychological murder, a ruthless, chilling betrayal of humanity that proves sometimes the most terrifying villains are not just the ones who commit the crime, but the ones who blindly defend it. To truly comprehend the anatomy of this tragedy, we must first analyze the psychological illusion of safety that preceded it. Criminal profiling teaches us a terrifying reality. The most successful predators do not violently break down our doors. Instead, they manipulate us into willingly handing over the keys. In the autumn of 2012, the quiet, suburban streets of Bentonville, Arkansas, provided the perfect canvas for a masterpiece of deception. At the center of this false sanctuary was Desiree. To understand how the wolf got into the house, we must understand the mother's extreme vulnerability. Desiree was a single mother carrying the crushing financial and emotional weight of raising two young daughters entirely on her own. To keep the lights on and food on the table, she worked grueling graveyard shifts at the local EZ Mart. She wasn't careless, she was perpetually exhausted, living in a state of survival mode. This is the exact psychological environment a predator looks to exploit. A working single mother doesn't just want a support system, she needs a village to survive. Right next door, she believed she had found her guardian angels. Enter Amanda and Zachary Hawley. To Desiree, Amanda was a confidante and a best friend, while Zachary effortlessly slipped into the role of the dependable, protective Uncle Zach. We must analyze the sheer, chilling brilliance of Zachary's camouflage here. By offering free, reliable childcare while Desiree worked late into the night, the Hawleys didn't just help a struggling neighbor, they embedded themselves flawlessly into the Bridgman family's core survival ecosystem. Psychologically, when someone solves your most critical, desperate problems, your natural defense mechanisms completely shut down. Gratitude replaces scrutiny. The Hawleys were given a house key and granted unrestricted physical and emotional access to the girls. Zachary wasn't a suspicious outsider lurking in the bushes. He was the trusted insider who tenderly carried a sleeping Jersey from his couch to her bed. This profound, unquestioning reliance birthed a fatal normalization of boundaries, culminating in one seemingly insignificant, yet catastrophic detail: the side door. Desiree made it a nightly habit to leave her side door unlocked. From her perspective, this was merely a practical manifestation of absolute trust, a simple convenience so her best friend and Uncle Zach could seamlessly transfer the sleeping girls or grab shared medications without the hassle of a deadbolt. However, through the cold lens of forensic analysis, that unlocked door represents a devastating contrast between a mother's innocent reliance and a predator's calculated opportunism. The circle of trust Desiree built to protect her daughters was, in reality, a meticulously constructed trap. Zachary Hawley didn't need to force his way into Jersey's life. He had already been given a VIP pass. The unlocked side door wasn't just a physical breach of security, it was a psychological loophole that allowed a monster to bypass every natural maternal alarm system. Desiree believed she was leaving the door open for a savior, completely unaware of the devil waiting patiently on the porch. To objectively analyze the gravity of Jersey Bridgman's murder, one must first examine the chronological trajectory of her brief existence. Statistically, a child who survives extreme domestic violence remains in a highly vulnerable demographic, but the specific sequence of Jersey's life presents a devastating, almost clinical paradox. By the time she was 5 years old in 2011, she had already survived a documented environment that defied fundamental human rights. Investigations into her biological father and stepmother's residence revealed conditions akin to a torture facility. Jersey was subjected to systematic starvation as a form of discipline. She was entirely deprived of a bed, forced to sleep on the bare floor, and most horrifically, physically tethered to a bedroom dresser, using a heavy metal dog choke chain. To prevent her from accessing food at night, both perpetrators were ultimately convicted and incarcerated, theoretically terminating her exposure to domestic maltreatment. Upon being legally transferred into the full-time custody of her biological mother, Desiree, Jersey exhibited an extraordinary degree of psychological resilience. From a behavioral standpoint, children subjected to prolonged physical restraint and chronic starvation frequently display severe cognitive regression, attachment disorders, and profound antisocial tendencies. Jersey, however, completely defied these clinical expectations. She successfully integrated into the first grade, demonstrating standard, age-appropriate developmental milestones. She exhibited a vibrant affinity for the color pink, engaged actively with her peers, and assumed a highly protective, nurturing dynamic with her younger sister, Leah. The psychological markers of her previous trauma appeared to be actively receding. By all institutional and observational measures, she had successfully navigated her way out of an established hellscape and was rapidly transitioning into a functional, healthy childhood. This baseline of verified recovery sets the stage for the most chillingly ironic variable in the entire case. The child welfare system and the biological mother had seemingly succeeded. Desiree had extracted her daughter from a verified nightmare and relocated her to a quiet, suburban enclave specifically designed to foster healing and domestic security. Yet, in the very act of executing this rescue, Desiree inadvertently engineered a fatal geographical and social proximity. The environment selected for the child's rehabilitation effectively became a highly efficient hunting ground. By actively seeking a reliable support system to maintain this new, stable life, the mother unknowingly delivered Jersey from the hands of overt, disorganized perpetrators directly into the calculated, unimpeded grasp of a sadistically motivated, lethal predator. The supreme cruelty of this narrative is not rooted in emotional melodrama, but in its cold structural irony. The exact mechanism designed for Jersey's salvation, the trusted neighbor, the open door, the community support net functioned as the precise instrument of her demise. She survived the visible monsters sharing her own DNA, only to be systematically eradicated by the invisible monster her mother had deliberately chosen as their ultimate protector. The night of November 19, 2012 settled over Bentonville with a deceptive, suffocating calm. To understand the sheer horror of this case, we must track the timeline as it ticks down to a devastating zero. At precisely 11:30 p.m., Desiree clocked out of her grueling shift and walked next door to collect her daughters. The girls were fast asleep, a picture of absolute domestic tranquility. Playing the role of the devoted neighborhood protector to perfection, Zachary Hawley scooped up a slumbering 6-year-old Jersey. He carried her across the short, freezing stretch of yard and stepped into Desiree's home, gently laying the child into her bed. As Desiree pulled the blankets up, Jersey stirred just long enough to whisper her favorite, innocent phrase, "I love you to the moon and back." The lights clicked off. The side door was left unlocked. The trap was inadvertently set. Then comes the midnight gap, a terrifying void where the timeline fractures into pure horror. True evil doesn't announce itself with shattered glass. It slips silently through an open door. Sometime in the pitch-black early morning hours, a shadow detached itself from the Hawleys' house. Zachary crossed the yard once more. He didn't need to force his way inside, he simply turned the handle, moving like a ghost through the quiet house. He entered the children's bedroom. He woke the groggy, confused little girl, because it was the familiar face of Uncle Zach. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. Using this sickening psychological leverage, he lured her out of her warm bed and into the freezing night. He dragged her to the decaying, abandoned house at 704 SEA Street, just 2 doors down. Inside that vacant, debris-filled shell, the ultimate, unspeakable betrayal unfolded in the dark. The illusion of safety violently shattered at dawn. At 6:30 a.m. on November 20th, Desiree woke to start the school day. She walked into the bedroom. Lee was safe, but Jersey's bed was completely empty. The silence in the house suddenly turned deafening. A frantic search of the rooms and closets yielded nothing. Panic metastasized into raw, suffocating terror as Desiree dialed 911, her voice cracking in a harrowing call that would forever haunt the dispatchers. Police swarmed the neighborhood within minutes. They fanned out, searching frantically, until an officer noticed the back door of the vacant house standing ajar. Inside a dusty, forgotten bedroom closet, they made a discovery that froze the blood of even the most seasoned investigators to the lifeless. Discarded body of 6-year-old Jersey. The predator hadn't just stolen her life, he had brutally strangled her using her own pajama pants. The monster was never hiding under the bed. He was the one who tucked her in. How does a community ever recover from a betrayal this intimate and calculated? Let us know your thoughts on this chilling case in the comments section below. If you want us to keep exposing the dark realities hidden behind closed doors, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every seasoned homicide detective knows that the most dangerous killers do not panic, they perform. In the immediate aftermath of Jersey's murder, Zachary Hawley put on a masterclass in calculated deception. He didn't flee the state or hide in the shadows. Instead, he presented investigators with a meticulously crafted, seemingly bulletproof alibi. During questioning, he casually mentioned waking up with severe stomach cramps, prompting him to walk to the nearby Easy Mart to buy a bottle of Pepto-Bismol at exactly 3:35 a.m. It was a brilliant, premeditated move because it was entirely verifiable. Security cameras at the convenience store confirmed his late-night errand down to the exact minute. Playing the role of the helpful, deeply concerned neighbor, Zachary was overwhelmingly cooperative. He confidently handed over the clothes he claimed to be wearing that night for forensic testing, betting his life that his 3:35 a.m. timestamp granted him absolute immunity for the dark hours before and after the store run. But staggering arrogance is often a predator's fatal flaw. Emboldened by his own perceived cleverness, Zachary made a catastrophic psychological miscalculation. Desperate to shake off the lingering, suffocating suspicion, he voluntarily requested a polygraph test to clear his name. He walked into the Bentonville Police Department, fully expecting to outsmart the machine and walk out an exonerated man. Instead, he walked right into a psychological bear trap. The charts didn't just indicate baseline stress, they screamed outright deception. He failed miserably. Armed with the failed polygraph and freshly expedited laboratory results, investigators initiated the takedown. The atmosphere in the interrogation room instantly shifted from a polite interview to an inescapable psychological corner. The investigators dropped the hammer.
The polygraph results indicated deception, meaning that you failed the test. The DNA matches your DNA.
Amen. So I believe I didn't do it.
Listen closely to that exchange, because it reveals the absolute, unvarnished core of a psychopath. Pay attention to what is glaringly, sickeningly absent from Zachary's panicked reaction jersey, presented with irrefutable, scientific proof that he brutally assaulted and strangled a 6-year-old child he claimed to love. There is not a single tear shed for the victim. There is no horror at the loss of a beautiful, innocent life. His immediate, reflexive response is a display of pathetic, narcissistic self-pity. The DNA evidence traps him in a corner, and his only concern is his own impending misery. He is terrified of going to prison. He is terrified of his wife leaving him. He is terrified of losing access to his child while standing accused of stealing someone else's. In the face of undeniable truth, the wolf finally drops the sheep's clothing, revealing a cowardly, self-obsessed monster who cares about absolutely nothing but his own skin. The mind games were over. The facade had officially crumbled. As the trial commenced in Benton County, the prosecution dismantled Zachary Hawley's defense with the cold, surgical precision of forensic science. This was no longer a case of he said, she said. It was a confrontation with steely evidence. The Arkansas State Crime Lab presented the jury with irrefutable biological proof, a direct DNA match from semen recovered at the scene. But perhaps the most damning evidence was the detail provided by Hawley himself during his eventual confession. He had sketched a floor plan of the abandoned house, pinpointing the exact closet where Jersey's body lay, information the Bentonville police had strategically withheld from the public. This proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Zachary Hawley wasn't just a suspect, he was the architect of Jersey's final moments. Throughout the harrowing testimony, observers in the gallery were struck by a chilling observation: Hawley's total lack of effect. As the medical examiner, Dr. Frank Peretti, described the brutal ligature strangulation and displayed graphic photos of the child's injuries, the courtroom was filled with audible gasps and stifled sobs. Yet, the man responsible sat in stony silence. Not a single tear fell, no flinch of guilt crossed his face. This robotic indifference highlighted a horrifying coldness. that suggested he viewed the entire proceeding as a mere inconvenience rather than a reckoning for a stolen life. The climax of this hollow performance came during the sentencing phase.
Apologize for the pain and suffering I've caused. I hope you can one day find it in your heart to forgive me. He was immediately handcuffed and taken into custody.
I'm gonna keep loving my other ones, you know? I'm gonna keep going on as a mom. Keep with my little girls. Leave the other two.
The logical analysis of this moment reveals a staggering moral gap. Holly's apology was plastic, a scripted, one-sentence performance that lacked the weight of the atrocity he committed. His tone was as casual as if he were apologizing for a minor social slight, a plastic sentiment offered only to appease the board deciding his fate. In contrast, Desare's words vibrate with the exhaustion of a mother who has lived through a 1,000-day funeral. The juxtaposition is jarring. The killer asks for forgiveness, to save his own skin, while the victim's mother only asks for the right to remember the good times, without the shadow of his face. The court saw through the charade. On May 27, 2015, Zachary Holly was sentenced to death by lethal injection, a sentence that remains a grim punctuation mark on a story of absolute betrayal. Justice was served, but as Desiree's wary eyes suggested, it could never truly balance the scales. The gavel has fallen, the Supermax cell door has locked shut, but the chilling echo of November 2012 continues to reverberate deeply through Bentonville, Arkansas. In the devastating aftermath of a tragedy so profound, a community was left to frantically pick up the shattered pieces of its own innocence. Walk down SCA Street in the years following the murder, or through the quiet corridors of the local elementary school, and you would see a specific, vibrant hue blanketing the town purple. It was 6-year-old Jersey Bridgman's absolute favorite color. In the wake of her horrific murder, purple ribbons adorned mailboxes, front porches, and trees. They fluttered in the cold winter wind, a delicate, melancholic visual representation of a bright, beautiful life snuffed out far too soon. But the town needed something far more permanent than ribbons to anchor its grief, and more importantly, its outrage. At the Children's Advocacy Center of Benton County, a bronze statue was unveiled in her honor, cast in cold, unyielding metal. The sculpture immortalizes the pure innocence of childhood. However, this monument serves a much heavier dual purpose. It is not merely a place for quiet reflection or a tragic testament to a little girl who loved her younger sister. It is a permanent, silent sentinel. It stands as an unwavering alarm bell for every adult who crosses its path. The statue demands that we look at it and remember the excruciating, irreversible price of a community's broken trust. This brings us to the blood-soaked lesson of Jersey Bridgman's story, a warning that fundamentally shatters everything society teaches us about safety. For generations, we have conditioned our children to fear the proverbial boogeyman. We hammer the concept of stranger danger into their heads. We warn them to avoid the shadowy figure in the dark alleyway or the unknown vehicle slowly rolling down the street. But the clinical, horrifying truth of forensic psychology dictates a much darker reality. The most lethal predators do not wear the grotesque face of a monster, and they rarely hide in the dark. Instead, they wear the flawless camouflage of everyday life. They are the enthusiastic next-door neighbor who always offers to mow your lawn. They are your husband's weekend drinking buddy. They are the fun uncle who brings candy, makes your kids laugh, and generously offers to carry your sleeping daughter to bed so you can rest after a grueling night shift. Predators like Zachary Holly are elite masters of emotional infiltration. They do not necessarily groom the child first. They systematically groom the parents. They manufacture a brilliant facade of helpfulness, reliability, and warmth, disarming the natural, biological alarm systems of the adults tasked with protecting the vulnerable. They build a sturdy bridge of trust solely for the purpose of walking across it to claim their prey in the dead of night. This is the harrowing, uncomfortable takeaway that every parent, guardian, and caregiver must absorb. You can never outsource the absolute safety of your children based on the flimsy, subjective premise of familiarity. Knowing someone for a few months, or even a few years, does not grant them a VP pass to your child's physical boundaries. Convenience must never be allowed to eclipse vigilance. Desiree made the fatal, albeit innocently intended, decision to leave her side door unlocked to accommodate a trusted friend. It was a gesture of community, a symbol of an open-door policy among loved ones. Yet, that single assumption of safety, that dangerous belief that "he is a good guy, I know him," became the fatal loophole that allowed a predator to silently extract a child from her own sanctuary. We must stop confusing physical proximity with safety. We must stop confusing friendliness with morality. The complacency of well-meaning adults is the very oxygen that child predators breathe. The tragic legacy of Jersey Bridgman is a mandate for relentless, unapologetic vigilance. It is a strict demand that we lock our doors both literally and metaphorically, and critically evaluate every single individual who seeks access to our children. Because the heartbreaking reality, the definitive lesson written in the blood of a 6-year-old girl, is that adult subjectivity and the illusion of safety are sometimes paid for with the ultimate, irreversible price: an innocent angel who closes her eyes in her own bed and simply never wakes up again.
Trial, Barry claimed he and the girls were attacked by someone with dark skin and dark hair, and that he owed thousands of dollars to a loan shark named Paul. But the jury didn't believe his story and found him guilty on 2 counts of second-degree murder.
Neighbors, now in shock, recall seeing a family that appeared happy.
This is a family that was nice. Interactions were very minimal. The dad and kids, they seemed happy. The kids, I saw them the other day, they were playing and happy.
It was Christmas 2017 in Oak Bay, Canada. Inside the apartment at 1400 Beach Drive, the power had been completely cut off, leaving the unit in total darkness. A desperate mother stood knocking frantically on the window in vain, searching for her 2 young daughters, aged 4 and 6, who were supposed to have been returned to her by noon. When police forced open the locked door, they uncovered a blood-soaked crime scene of unimaginable horror. The 2 children lay lifeless on the bed. Their father was found gasping in the bathtub. His initial statement directed the investigation toward a violent underworld debt settlement. Yet forensic evidence, and the direction of the bloodstains, told a completely different story. There were no signs of forced entry from outside. Who had locked that door from the inside? The chronological initiation of this forensic investigation is set against the contrasting backdrop of December 25, 2017, in Oak Bay, British Columbia. Oak Bay is a highly affluent, picturesque seaside community traditionally characterized by its low crime rate and tranquil environment. On this specific holiday, the neighborhood of Beach Drive was heavily decorated with festive lighting and occupied by families celebrating Christmas. However, beneath this facade of seasonal normalcy, a high-stakes family court mandate was approaching a critical legal deadline. A strict temporary custody arrangement dictated that the biological father was legally obligated to return his children to their mother at precisely 12 p.m. As noon passed without the mandated physical handover, the situation rapidly deteriorated. Repeated telephone calls and text messages sent by the mother went entirely unanswered. After several hours of mounting anxiety and independent searches of local areas, the mother officially contacted the Oak Bay Police Department, initiating a formal missing persons protocol and a high-priority welfare check at the father's primary residence. Law enforcement officers were dispatched to 1400 Beach Drive as the late afternoon light began to fade, arriving at the apartment complex around 4:15 p.m. Upon approaching the specific ground floor unit, responding officers immediately identified a stark and concerning environmental anomaly. While the surrounding apartments were brightly lit and radiating heat, the target unit was completely devoid of electrical power. The apartment had been entirely disconnected from the municipal utility grid, plunging the interior into total darkness, a massive red flag during the freezing temperatures of a Canadian winter. Officers knocked forcefully on the primary door and announced their presence, but the residents remained eerily silent. The main entryway was securely locked from the inside, indicating no obvious signs of a forced external breach. Recognizing the escalating risk profile associated with a failed legal handover in a dark, unresponsive environment, Police Command escalated their tactical response to preserve the physical integrity of the primary entrance for potential forensic analysis. officers bypassed a destructive physical breach. Instead, they collaborated with the building's property management company to procure a master spare key. Upon unlocking the door and crossing the threshold, law enforcement personnel were immediately enveloped in pitch-black conditions. This total absence of ambient light necessitated the deployment of high-lumen tactical flashlights. Officers initiated a highly methodical, room-by-room spatial clearance of the residential layout, advancing cautiously through the silent hallway to locate the primary occupant and establish the baseline nature of the emergency. This tactical sweep ultimately directed law enforcement to the apartment's bathroom, where the focal point of the active scene was uncovered. The narrow beams of the flashlights cut through the darkness to reveal a bathtub filled to the brim with water. Partially submerged within this flooded basin was a single adult male, subsequently identified as the biological father and primary resident of the apartment. A rapid preliminary medical triage executed by the officers revealed significant, acute physical trauma. The subject presented with multiple open lacerations anatomically concentrated in two highly specific regions, the left pectoral area of the chest cavity and the anterior region of the neck. Although the subject was unresponsive to initial verbal commands, officers noted shallow, compromised biological signs of life, including a faint pulse and labored breathing. Recognizing an immediate and critical medical emergency, the responding officers secured the immediate perimeter and rapidly radioed for advanced emergency medical services. This pivotal discovery officially transformed the operation from a standard welfare check into a secured, active forensic investigation. Following the initial discovery at the apartment, the investigative focus temporarily shifted to the local hospital, where the sole surviving adult, the biological father of the two young victims, was receiving medical treatment. Once medical personnel determined he was stable enough to communicate, law enforcement officers proceeded to collect his official statement. It was during this hospital room interrogation that the surviving man introduced an alternative narrative, presenting a comprehensive home invasion scenario to explain the fatal events. According to the chronological sequence provided by the father, the incident was the direct result of a targeted attack by an unknown external assailant. He asserted that he was walking into his bedroom when he was suddenly ambushed from behind. He provided a vague physical description of the attacker, identifying him only as a dark-skinned stranger. The man claimed that this initial physical assault was swift, incapacitating him immediately and causing him to lose consciousness on the floor before he could process the situation or defend himself. The narrative provided to the police continued with his subsequent recovery of consciousness. The father stated that upon waking from the initial assault, he dragged himself through the apartment and discovered that his children had been killed. However, his account stated that before he could take any further action or call for emergency services, he was confronted by the assailant once more. He alleged that he was overpowered by the same intruder, subjected to a second series of stab wounds, and subsequently lost consciousness for a second time, ultimately waking up in the bathtub where first responders originally located him. To establish a logical motive for this extreme level of violence, the man introduced a complex backstory involving underground criminal syndicates. He confessed to law enforcement that he was entrenched in a severe gambling addiction and had accrued a substantial illicit debt, totaling approximately $25,000. He claimed this money was owed to a dangerous local loan shark whom he could only identify by the first name, Paul. Because he possessed no financial means to settle this outstanding debt, the father alleged that he was coerced into an illegal arrangement. He claimed that Paul forced him to utilize his apartment as a temporary stash house for holding bags of contraband, which he suspected contained illegal narcotics. Based on this premise, the father theorized that the brutal home invasion was a calculated retaliation executed by the criminal gang. He suggested that the loan shark had dispatched a hitman to his residence to settle the financial dispute, framing the death of his daughters and his own injuries as the violent fallout of a narcotics-related debt collection from an analytical law enforcement perspective. Documenting the specific testimony established the primary defense hypothesis. Investigators were now tasked with systematically cross-referencing this detailed timeline, the physical existence of the loan shark, Paul, and the mechanics of the described ambush against the concrete forensic evidence secured at the crime scene. While the surviving suspect's narrative provided a highly detailed account of a violent home invasion, the subsequent forensic examination of the crime scene painted a starkly contradictory picture. In criminal investigations, physical evidence serves as an objective baseline. It does not possess the capacity to fabricate, misremember, or alter timelines. In this specific case, the systematic analysis of the apartment revealed critical physical discrepancies that immediately began to dismantle the father's "intruder" hypothesis. The investigation commenced with a thorough peripheral analysis of the apartment's boundaries. Crime scene technicians meticulously inspected all potential points of entry and egress, including the main door, the balcony, and all window frames. The official forensic report indicated an absolute absence of forced entry. There were no tool marks on the deadbolts, no shattered glass, and no compromised security latches. Furthermore, the egress analysis yielded a highly significant anomaly. While the interior of the apartment contained substantial blood evidence, the perimeter was entirely clean. There were no bloody footprints, shoe impressions, or transfer stains leading out of the apartment threshold or into the external public hallway. If an external assailant had executed the attack and fled the scene, basic forensic principles dictate they would have inevitably tracked biological material out of the primary environment. The total absence of an exit trail strongly suggested that the perpetrator never actually left the premises. Inside the apartment, BPA provided a spatial reconstruction of the event. The blood evidence did not reflect a rapid, chaotic hit-and-run scenario typical of a professional assassination. Instead, investigators documented an extensive drip trail and specifically identified 21 bloody foot transfer stains. Crucially, forensic analysis determined these prints were made by feet wearing socks, rather than outdoor footwear. The directional flow of these sock prints mapped a deliberate, pacing movement back and forth between the bedrooms and the kitchen area. This pattern indicated that the individual walking through the scene was unhurried and moving freely within the apartment long after the initial bloodletting had occurred. The physical evidence surrounding the weapon further undermined the suspect's claims. The murder weapon was not a foreign object brought to the scene by a hitman. It was a standard kitchen knife sourced directly from the apartment's own cutlery drawer. Forensic technicians discovered a distinct blood smear on the handle of that specific drawer, proving that the perpetrator already had blood on their hands when they opened it to retrieve the weapon. Finally, forensic pathology delivered the most definitive contradiction to the survivor's timeline. During the autopsies, medical examiners analyzed the gastric contents of the two deceased victims. The pathology reports confirmed that both victims possessed completely empty stomachs, indicating they had not consumed any food, including breakfast, that day. This biological metric established the time of death firmly in the early morning hours, scientifically estimated to be between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. This forensic reality stood in undeniable contrast to the father's official police statement, in which he adamantly claimed the alleged intruder had attacked the family in the mid-afternoon. The empirical data unequivocally collapsed the established alibi. As the investigation transitioned from the physical crime scene to the medical and psychological evaluation of the surviving suspect, the intruder hypothesis began to collapse entirely. The fourth phase of the analysis focused on glaring flaws in the suspect's alibi, systematically categorized into biological discrepancies, documentary evidence, and post-incident behavioral anomalies. Medical professionals evaluating the adult male at the hospital immediately noted a stark asymmetry between his personal injuries and the fatal reality of the broader incident. The attending trauma surgeons documented that the stab wounds on the suspect's left chest and anterior neck were highly superficial. None of these lacerations posed an immediate threat to his life, nor did they sever any major arteries or compromise vital organs. Furthermore, a biomechanical analysis of the wound coordinates revealed a precise mathematical match with the natural reach, leverage, and angle of a right-handed individual inflicting harm upon themselves. In forensic pathology, hesitation marks and shallow, grouped wounds in these specific anatomical zones are classic indicators of self-inflicted injury. This clinical data stood in sharp contrast to the extreme, unhesitating and lethal force exerted upon the young victims. The medical evidence scientifically proved that the suspect was not on the receiving end of a targeted assassination attempt. Simultaneously, crime scene investigators processing the apartment recovered a critical piece of physical evidence that further dismantled the external threat narrative: a handwritten document. Forensic document analysis confirmed this to be a suicide note authored by the suspect prior to the incident. The text within the note did not reference any fear of loan sharks, illicit cartels, or a hitman named Paul. Instead, it functioned as a calculated grievance document. The contents explicitly blamed his ex-wife and his own biological parents for his ongoing financial ruin and personal failures. Most importantly, the note clearly articulated a premeditated intention to end his own life. The existence of this document unequivocally pointed to an internal, premeditated sequence of events rather than a random home invasion. The final component of the alibi's collapse centered on the suspect's behavioral psychology. Following his surgical treatment, the suspect regained consciousness and full lucidity in the intensive care unit. During his interactions with hospital staff, attending nurses and police detectives over several days, investigators noted a profound behavioral anomaly. The suspect did not ask a single question regarding the status, location, or well-being of his two children. In victimology and behavioral profiling, a parent who has just survived a violent home invasion universally exhibits immediate, frantic concern for their offspring. The suspect's absolute silence and apathy regarding the children were psychologically incompatible with his fabricated narrative of being a victimized, protective father. Thank you for watching this forensic breakdown. If you appreciate objective, fact-based true crime analysis without the emotional sensationalism, please subscribe to the channel to support our ongoing case files. We want to hear your analytical perspective. Do you believe post-incident behavioral anomalies are as legally compelling as physical bloodstain evidence? Share your detailed thoughts in the comments section below, and make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on our next investigation. The accumulation of forensic evidence systematically dismantled the surviving suspect's narrative. Upon completing the crime scene reconstruction and verifying the biological improbabilities of the suspect's injuries, investigators formally concluded that the loan shark, Paul, and the alleged underworld hitman were entirely fictitious constructs designed to deflect culpability. With external threats scientifically ruled out by the closed perimeter nature of the crime scene and the bloodstain pattern analysis, the investigation reached a definitive conclusion. Based on an unbroken chain of physical evidence, the sole perpetrator responsible for the fatalities was the biological father, Andrew Berry. To finalize the criminal profile, investigators shifted their focus to establishing the underlying catalysts that triggered the event, uncovering a dual motive of total financial collapse and extreme psychological retaliation. The secondary phase of the investigation relied heavily on forensic accounting. Detectives subpoenaed banking records, credit statements, and employment history to map the suspect's financial trajectory in the months preceding the incident. The data exposed a catastrophic personal ruin. Official employment records indicated that the suspect had been entirely jobless since May of 2017. Lacking a steady income, he engaged in highly destructive financial behaviors. Banking data revealed that he had prematurely liquidated his professional pension, systematically funneling the entirety of those funds into a severe and escalating gambling addiction. By the time of the incident, the financial data showed a state of absolute insolvency. His credit cards were completely maxed out, his bank accounts were severely overdrawn, and he possessed zero liquid capital. This total economic collapse culminated in the termination of his basic living utilities, Both electrical and heating services to his apartment had been disconnected due to months of chronic non-payment. While financial ruin provided the baseline stressor, behavioral analysts identified a much darker, primary psychological driver behind the lethal action, a phenomenon known in criminology as spousal revenge. The suspect harbored deep-seated animosity toward his ex-wife Sarah, stemming from their separation and the subsequent custody arrangement. He was acutely aware that the recent termination of his apartment's utilities would inevitably be discovered by her upon the scheduled handover of the children. Within the strict parameters of family court, lacking basic utilities, specifically heat and electricity, during the winter season constitutes a fundamentally unsafe environment. The suspect knew this discovery would unequivocally result in the immediate and permanent revocation of his remaining visitation rights. Facing the absolute loss of control, total public humiliation, and the finality of his financial defeat, the suspect's psychological state deteriorated into a framework of punitive retaliation. Criminal profilers categorized the subsequent event as a calculated act of spousal revenge. The suspect recognized that his ex-wife's primary emotional attachment and core foundation were the children. Consequently, the extreme violence was utilized as the ultimate instrument to inflict maximum, irreparable psychological destruction upon his former spouse. The investigation concluded that the suspect executed the ultimate act of domestic violence to ensure that if he were to lose everything, his ex-wife would suffer the highest possible magnitude of loss. A comprehensive forensic review of this case inevitably extends beyond the immediate timeline of the incident to scrutinize the institutional oversights that allowed the tragedy to occur. An analysis of the perpetrator's historical behavioral data between 2013 and 2015 reveals a well-documented trajectory of escalating domestic volatility. Law enforcement and legal databases contained explicit records of the suspect's coercive and physically intimidating behavior directed at his ex-wife. Notably, official police reports documented a severe verbal threat in which the suspect explicitly stated his intention to blow up the house, demonstrating a clear capacity for catastrophic, indiscriminate violence. Furthermore, the records detailed incidents of physical assault, including instances where the suspect forcefully pinned his ex-wife to a bed, necessitating law enforcement intervention and the subsequent issuance of a restraining order. These early events established a verifiable baseline of coercive control and extreme emotional instability, serving as primary clinical red flags that were documented yet inadequately mitigated by the broader legal apparatus. The systemic failure compounded significantly when evaluating the involvement of Child Protective Services, specifically the MCFD. Institutional records confirm that during 2015 and 2016, social services received multiple alarming reports regarding the physical and psychological safety of the two young victims while in their father's custody. These reports were not arbitrary. They included empirical medical documentation of an unexplained head trauma sustained by the younger child, alongside highly concerning allegations of inappropriate physical contact. Despite the severity of these claims, the institutional response was procedurally inadequate. The subsequent investigations were formally closed without implementing long-term protective measures. The bureaucratic justification cited a lack of sufficient empirical evidence to meet the strict statutory thresholds required to secure a criminal conviction or permanently sever parental access. By rigidly adhering to the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt for basic intervention, the agency effectively dismissed the cumulative pattern of risk, leaving the vulnerable minors exposed to an ongoing, unmonitored threat environment. The ultimate systemic breakdown culminated within the jurisdiction of the family court system. During the protracted custody proceedings, the presiding judiciary was presented with a comprehensive portfolio of the suspect's behavioral anomalies, including his documented history of domestic aggression, verified financial instability, and the concerning MCFD reports. Despite the presence of these glaring psychological and environmental red flags, the court fundamentally miscalculated the perpetrator's threat assessment matrix. In a critical judicial oversight, the court mandated shared custody and granted unsupervised overnight visitation rights to the suspect. This ruling exposed a deeply ingrained systemic bias within family law jurisprudence. the default prioritization of a biological parent's legal right to access over the empirical safety and physical preservation of the children. By misinterpreting the suspect's course of control as a series of isolated, manageable conflicts rather than recognizing them as indicators of a high-risk domestic homicide trajectory, the judicial system inadvertently facilitated the perpetrator's unrestricted access to the victims, thereby engineering the exact conditions necessary for the fatal outcome to occur. During the comprehensive proceedings at the Supreme Court, the judicial process meticulously dismantled the fabricated defense hypothesis. The defense counsel attempted to maintain the narrative of an external attack orchestrated by a fictitious loan shark, presenting the defendant as a secondary victim of a violent home invasion. However, the prosecution countered this narrative not with circumstantial theories, but with an overwhelming volume of empirical physical evidence. The court was presented with definitive bloodstain pattern analysis, which documented the undisturbed, closed perimeter nature of the crime scene and mapped the precise trajectory of the bloody sock prints moving between the bedrooms and the kitchen. Furthermore, medical examiners provided expert testimony regarding the victim's gastric contents, scientifically fixing the time of death to the early morning hours, thereby legally invalidating the defendant's mid-afternoon timeline. The recovery of the defendant's heavily blood-soaked clothing, strategically discarded in the bathroom prior to his entry into the bathtub, combined with the superficial, biomechanically self-inflicted nature of his own wounds, provided undeniable proof of his direct culpability. Consequently, the court completely rejected the Truder alibi, classifying it as a physiological and logistical impossibility. Faced with this irrefutable chain of forensic data, the jury reached a definitive consensus. The court convicted Andrew Berry on 2 separate counts of second-degree murder. In addressing the extreme gravity of the offenses, the presiding judge delivered the mandatory sentence for such convictions under the Penal Code, life imprisonment. The critical judicial determination, however, pertained to the parole eligibility period. Recognizing the egregious breach of parental trust, the high degree of moral culpability, and the calculated nature of the crime, the court set a stringent minimum threshold, mandating that the perpetrator serve at least 22 years in a federal penitentiary before being legally permitted to apply for parole. The judicial process did not conclude with the initial sentencing. The defendant launched multiple legal challenges, filing formal appeals in both 2022 and 2024. These appeals argued procedural errors and challenged the severity of the parole ineligibility period. In both instances, the appellate courts conducted rigorous reviews of the trial records, unilaterally dismissing the appeals. The appellate panels ruled that the initial proceedings were constitutionally sound, and that the profound moral culpability of the acts fully justified the stringent penalty, thereby cementing the legal finality of the conviction. From a criminological and legal standpoint, this case stands as a definitive, clinical textbook example of predictable domestic homicide. The behavioral pathology exhibited by the perpetrator, characterized by escalating coercive control, financial instability, and profound vindictiveness, aligns perfectly with established risk assessment matrices for spousal revenge. The incident highlights the catastrophic consequences of judicial and institutional systems failing to accurately calculate the lethality of documented psychological red flags, underscoring the necessity for family courts to prioritize objective risk assessments over the default presumption of parental access. Furthermore, the investigation serves as a critical empirical lesson for modern law enforcement protocols. Initial suspect testimony must immediately be subjected to the rigorous scrutiny of the scientific method. The resolution of this case was not achieved through interrogations or confessions, but through the silent, immutable testimony of forensic science. By prioritizing blood spatter patterns, pathology reports, and physical crime scene reconstruction over the deceptive verbal statements provided at the scene, investigators successfully exposed a fabricated reality and secured a conviction based entirely on the absolute primacy of objective physical evidence.
She's supposed to go to California in the morning. The plane. And he knows, as I told him this, he knew when the store was closing. I had a bad feeling about him.
Okay, how long have you been looking for him? When was the last time you saw him? How long ago?
About half an hour ago.
So you've been looking for her for a half an hour?
Yes. There's nobody in the store. And he knew the store was closing. He said he was going to McDonald's. She went with him. I should have told her to stay with me.
Clip here, you see them walking right through Walmart. This is as they're leaving. Donald Smith in black there, Cherish in a little dress. She's 8 years old at this time, and they eventually leave together. This is really the last time we see Cherish at this Walmart, possibly the last time she was seen alive. A lot of video here, but this is she's just walking out with him after he befriended Cherish and her mom earlier in the evening at a Dollar General and promised them, according to Rain Periwinkle, her children needed clothes and promised to go buy them maybe $100 worth of clothes at this Walmart. Also hearing from Cherish's mom, Rain Periwinkle, as she called 911, just horrified with the fact that she was realizing her daughter was gone.
Never be able to work through all this. Never. I'll never be okay. So rather than spend the rest of my life being humiliated by myself, telling all this crap in my head, I might as well just die with it. Easier to just die with it because I'll probably never get through it anyway. That's what my brain's telling me.
The 911 dispatcher could barely make out the mother's panicked, hysterical screams. It was just past 11 p.m. at a Jacksonville Walmart when 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle vanished into the night. Security footage revealed a bone-chilling reality. The little girl, wearing a bright orange dress, was seen happily skipping out of the store, obediently following a 61-year-old man she had met only hours prior. She had no idea she was skipping straight into a living nightmare. What happened next is guaranteed to ignite a fire of pure rage in everyone who hears this story.
Think you killed her.
Okay, ma'am, you think she's been taken. You say you have other kids with you?
Yes, I do. He was giving too much attention. He wanted her to buy these really tall shoes that were women's shoes, and I told him no. I said they're too high for her. I wouldn't even wear shoes that high. Maybe he was grooming her. I hope to God he doesn't kill her, and I hope to God he doesn't rape her.
Okay, and when did you meet him today?
I met him at Dollar General in Edgewood.
Cherish Lily Periwinkle was the kind of 8-year-old girl who brought light into every room she entered. She was known for being incredibly sweet, obedient, and always carrying a bright, infectious smile on her face. For Cherish, life was about to get incredibly exciting. It was the early evening of June 21, 2013, and the young girl was practically buzzing with anticipation. Why? Because the very next morning, she was scheduled to board a flight to California to spend the summer with her biological father. She couldn't wait. She wanted to look perfect for her dad, hoping to bring some new clothes for the big trip. But the reality of her family's situation was heavy and suffocating. Her mother, Rain, was a single parent raising 3 young children, doing everything she could to keep her head above water. That evening, Rain packed Cherish and her 2 younger half-sisters up and headed to a local Dollar General in Jacksonville, Florida, to grab some much-needed supplies and maybe, just maybe, a few inexpensive items for Cherish's trip. The pressure on Rain's shoulders was crushing. She had exactly a $100 bill in her pocket, and that money had to stretch to cover groceries, household necessities, clothes for the girls, and the cab fare to the airport the next morning. Every single penny was accounted for. As they wandered the aisles, Cherish's eyes lit up. She had found a dress she absolutely loved. She held it up, a hopeful, bright smile spreading across her face. But as Rain checked the price tag and frantically did the mental math, the devastating weight of their financial reality set in. She couldn't afford it. With a heavy heart, Rain had to do what no mother ever wants to do. She gently told her 8-year-old daughter to put her favorite dress back on the shelf. It was a quiet, heartbreaking moment between a struggling mother and an understanding child. But they weren't alone. From the shadows of the store, Someone had been silently watching. 61-year-old Donald Smith had been observing the family from afar, his eyes tracking their every move. Predators don't just choose their victims at random, they hunt for vulnerabilities. Smith saw a tired, overwhelmed single mother holding onto 3 young kids. He saw the financial desperation. He saw the perfect opportunity.
Numbers of surveillance videos show the minute Periwinkle's family first encountered him, their visit to a Northside Walmart together, and the last time the 8-year-old was seen alive walking out of the store alone with Smith.
As Rain and the girls made their way outside, Smith made his move. He approached them not as a threat, but wearing the mask of a gentle, kindly grandfather. His voice was soft, warm, and disarmingly comforting as he struck up a conversation.
I looked to my right and he was standing in the doorway looking right at us. He said, "You look like you have your hands full. I have a couple of little ones."
56-year-old Donald Smith is watching Rain and the kids when he then offers to help them. He claims he has a $150 gift card to Walmart and his wife can drive it to them.
He saw this window of opportunity where he would be able to use a weakness, financial insecurity, and he realized that he would be able to entice them with money to be able to get time with these girls alone.
It sounded like a blessing, a rare act of pure kindness on a difficult night for a mother who just wanted to make her daughter smile. Little did they know, behind that kind smile was a sinister, twisted plan already set in motion.
Surveillance video from inside a Northside Dollar General paints the picture of a tragedy beginning to unfold. From the moment 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle and her family came into contact with convicted sex offender and now accused killer Donald Smith. Cherish's mother, Rain, made this call to 911 from Walmart once she realized her daughter and Smith were gone.
I met a man today at Dollar General. He saw that I was struggling to buy them some clothes. He drove us here to buy us some clothes, and the only reason I went with him because she said his wife was going to be here.
Surveillance video from the Dollar General shows Smith talking with the family. From there, his van is seen driving away with Rain, Cherish, and her 2 younger sisters inside. A short time later, they were all seen shopping together inside the Walmart on Lem Turner Road.
The parking lot outside the Dollar General was growing darker, and suddenly, the sky opened up. A heavy rain began to fall, soaking the pavement. Rain and her 3 young daughters stood there in the damp chill, waiting for Donald Smith's elusive wife to finally pull up in her gold car. But the minutes agonizingly ticked by, and no one arrived. The kids were getting restless, and Rain's maternal instincts, that primal gut feeling that something wasn't right, started to kick in. She hesitated. The idea of getting into a stranger's vehicle was eating away at her. Sensing her hesitation and feeling his window of opportunity closing, Smith's demeanor instantly shifted. The warm grandfatherly act slipped just a fraction. He got snappy, pivoting to a classic psychological manipulation tactic, guilt tripping. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and held his driver's license right in front of her face.
At what point did he again ask, "Do you want to go?"
He got snappy with me because I wouldn't get in the van.
What do you mean he got snappy with you? Describe that for me.
He had an attitude. He said, "You don't have to do this." And he asked if I wanted to see his driver's license.
It was a terrifying masterclass in manipulation. By offering his official identification, he manufactured a brilliant, false sense of transparency. Terrified of coming off as rude or ungrateful to a man who was seemingly offering her a financial lifeline, and absolutely desperate to get those new clothes for Cherish's trip, Rain forced herself to ignore the deafening alarm bells ringing in her head. She agreed to get into his white van. I gotta be honest with you guys, this part really makes my blood boil. Predators are absolute experts at smelling desperation. They know exactly how to back a vulnerable person into a corner, making you feel guilty, paranoid, or impolite for simply wanting to protect your own children. They weaponize your own politeness against you. I'm curious, how would you feel if someone pressured you into their van like this? Drop your take in the comments below. The moment the heavy doors of that 1998 white Dodge van slid open, the red flags were blinding. The interior of the vehicle was a horrifying, blood-chilling setup. It was unnervingly dark. The windows were entirely blocked out, covered by heavy blinds so that no one from the outside world could see in. The middle row of seats had been completely ripped out, leaving a massive, eerie empty space in the center, and the front passenger seat. It was pushed all the way down, reclined completely flat on its back like a dentist's chair. It wasn't a family vehicle, it was a mobile trap. With no other choice in her mind, Rain shoved the baby's stroller into the massive void in the middle, secured Cherish and her sisters in the back bench seat, and nervously climbed into the front. As the van pulled out of the parking lot and headed toward the Walmart on Lem Turner Road, the tension inside the confined space was thick enough to cut with a knife. Rain sat rigid, her anxiety skyrocketing as they rode in the dark with this stranger. Smith could feel her fear radiating in the tight space. He turned his head, looked her dead in the eyes with a calm, cold gaze, and delivered a sentence that still sends shivers down my spine. Donald Smith. Don't worry. You're safe with me. Those words were meant to soothe her, but looking back, they were the sinister, twisted promise of a monster who already knew exactly how this nightmare was going to end.
I had a strange feeling about him when I first met him, and he took her to the dressing room twice, and I was hoping that she would be okay, and I was looking at the shoes, and I didn't want him to think that I was overly protective.
Prosecutors say Smith offered to buy them all food at a McDonald's at the front of the store. Instead, they say he walked out with the little girl. And surveillance video shows his van leaving the parking lot, driving right past store security. Hours later, an Amber Alert was issued for Cherish, along with a description of Donald Smith and his white van.
Once inside the brightly lit aisles of the Lem Turner Walmart, the trap began to snap shut. Rain, still holding out hope for the promised $150 gift card, and the mysterious wife, started filling her shopping cart. For an hour and a half, she meticulously picked out outfits, making neat little piles for Cherish and her two younger sisters. But Donald Smith wasn't shopping. He wasn't browsing the aisles for his own family. He was just stalking them. He hovered in the background, a silent predator watching their every move. And then, he made his only contribution to the shopping cart. Out of all the thousands of items in that massive supercenter, Smith grabbed just one thing for himself, and casually tossed it in with the children's clothing, a thick bundle of rope. If that wasn't a horrifying enough red flag, his fixation on the 8-year-old Cherish grew increasingly sinister. While Rain was distracted tending to the younger girls, Smith actually took little Cherish into the dressing room not once, but twice. His twisted, perverted nature began bleeding through his fake grandfatherly facade when he picked out a pair of towering women's high heels and tried to pressure the young girl into wearing them. Rain immediately shut it down, telling him the shoes were entirely inappropriate for a child. She brushed it off, rationalizing that he was just a clueless, older man who didn't know anything about kids' fashion. She had no idea she was looking straight into the eyes of a monster actively grooming his prey. By 10:30 p.m., exhaustion was setting in. The three young girls were getting incredibly fussy, complaining that they were starving since they hadn't had dinner. Smith saw his ultimate window of opportunity. There was a McDonald's located right at the front entrance, inside the Walmart. He generously offered to go buy them all some food. Rain told him they just wanted a few cheeseburgers.
Prosecutors say Smith offered to buy them all food at a McDonald's at the front of the store. Instead, they say he walked out with the little girl. And surveillance video shows his van leaving the parking lot.
Then, Smith asked if Cherish could come with him to help carry the food. Because they were inside a crowded, public store, surrounded by security cameras and hundreds of shoppers, Rain's guard was down. She said yes. The Walmart security cameras captured those blood-chilling final moments. The CCTV footage shows 8-year-old Cherish, looking so small and innocent in her bright orange dress, happily skipping down the main aisle. She is obediently following the 61-year-old man, completely trusting him. But as they approached the McDonald's, Smith didn't stop to order. In the footage, you can see him pat his pockets, putting on a brief, calculated act as if he had forgotten his wallet in the car. Without a second thought, Cherish followed him past the registers, out the sliding glass doors, and straight into the dark, desolate parking lot toward his waiting white van. This is where the story takes a dark turn. "20 minutes passed. Then 30. Back in the clothing section, Rain was still waiting with her 2 younger daughters, staring down the empty aisles for any sign of Cherish or Donald Smith. Suddenly, the overhead intercom crackled to life, announcing that the Walmart would be closing shortly. A frigid wave of dread washed over Rain. She pushed her cart toward the front of the store, her steps quickening into a frantic sprint. When she finally reached the McDonald's at the entrance, her heart dropped into her stomach. The lights were off. The restaurant was completely dark. It hadn't just closed, it had been shut down for hours. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the chest. The food, the wallet, the gift card, it was all a lie. Chaos ensued. Rain abandoned her shopping cart and began running wildly through the massive supercenter, screaming bloody murder for someone, anyone, to help her. Because her own cell phone had been broken earlier that day, she frantically begged a Walmart employee to let her use theirs. At 11:20 p.m. she finally connected with a 911 dispatcher. The audio of that emergency call is nothing short of gut-wrenching. You can hear the raw, primal terror of a mother whose absolute worst nightmare is unfolding in real time. Amidst her hysterical cries and hyperventilating sobs, Rain screamed into the receiver.
Maybe he was her. I hope to God he doesn't kill her, and I hope to God he doesn't first. I don't want him to kill her. Or want to be one of those parents that are going through this. Oh my God.
When Jacksonville police arrived on the scene, they immediately pulled the store's CCTV footage. It didn't take long to identify the man walking out the sliding glass doors with 8-year-old Cherish. It was 61-year-old Donald Smith, and his background was the stuff of absolute nightmares. Smith was a registered predator with a horrifying 40-year rap sheet dedicated almost entirely to preying on young girls. Even more infuriating, he had just been released from jail a mere 3 weeks before he crossed paths with the Periwinkle family. The police had the suspect's name, his terrifying criminal history, clear video evidence of the abduction, and the exact description of his white Dodge van. They had everything they needed to blow this case wide open and lock down the city immediately. But they didn't. In a catastrophic failure of the system, authorities initially classified the incident not as a kidnapping, but as a missing person case. They essentially treated it as a child wandering off, completely ignoring the mother's desperate pleas and the glaring red flags of Smith's sickening record. Because of this fatal, baffling misjudgment, police delayed issuing an Amber Alert. They waited an agonizing 6 hours before finally broadcasting Cherish's face and Smith's white van to the public and the media. 6 hours in the dead of night, while a defenseless 8-year-old was trapped in a dark van with a lifelong predator. Does this make your blood boil too? 6 hours while a child is with a known monster. Drop your thoughts in the comments. By 5:30 a.m. the next morning, the local news had finally broadcasted the images of Cherish, Donald Smith, and his chilling white van. The city of Jacksonville woke up to a massive, frantic manhunt. But the crucial breakthrough didn't happen until around 9 a.m., when a concerned citizen called 911. The witness reported seeing a suspicious white van parked completely off the road, hidden deep in the thick bushes behind Highlands Baptist Church. The caller noted that the van was already gone, but they were terrified the driver might have dumped something in the woods.
He's calling about a suspicious van over here, a white van. And how long ago did you see it?
Oh man,
my goodness. You picked me up from work at 7 o'clock, so that was like 7:20.
It was like that. We didn't say nothing.
We didn't know anything until just now.
All right, and you said it's now gone?
Yes, ma'am.
But you think he may have, just in case, he might have dumped something?
Right, we don't know, but just in case, it looked suspicious because it was all the way to the back.
Minutes later, an eagle-eyed officer working an unrelated traffic crash on Interstate 95 spotted that exact same white Dodge van speeding down the highway. And then, the chase was on. Multiple police cruisers swarmed the interstate, cutting Smith off and forcing the van to a screeching halt. With weapons drawn and adrenaline pumping, officers commanded the 61-year-old predator to step out of the vehicle. Smith surrendered without a fight, stepping onto the pavement in a black t-shirt and jeans. But as officers threw him against the van to pat him down and slap on the cuffs, they noticed a terrifying, blood-chilling detail from the waist down. Smith's clothes were absolutely soaking wet and caked in fresh mud. When officers demanded to know why he was drenched, Smith didn't even flinch. He coldly lied, claiming he had been smoking crack with some prostitutes and that he just sweats profusely when he's high. But the police weren't buying his twisted story for a second. Looking at the thick mud and dripping water, a horrifying realization hit one of the arresting officers. The puzzle pieces connected in his mind, and he frantically yelled out to the others, "Oh my God, she's in the water!" A tactical team immediately rushed to the dense, marshy woods behind Highlands Baptist Church. A K-9 unit was deployed, and officers quickly noticed a fresh, sinister trail where the tall grass had been heavily trampled down. Following the path of flattened brush deep into the muddy terrain, they reached the edge of a murky, flooded creek. What they found there is absolutely devastating. Beneath the dark water, violently pinned down by heavy chunks of concrete asphalt, bricks, and debris, lay the lifeless body of 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle. She was still wearing the same bright orange dress she had worn to the store just hours earlier. The heartbreak of that moment is truly unimaginable. The specific officer who found her was completely overcome with emotion, later realizing that his own young daughter owned that exact same orange dress. Unwilling to leave the little girl alone in such a bleak place, he bravely stood guard in the water, physically protecting her tiny body from the alligators that roamed the creek until the crime scene investigators could arrive to bring her home. The physical hunt for the monster was over. But no one could have predicted what they would hear next on the jailhouse tapes. What kind of punishment do you think fits a monster who could do something so unthinkable? While the entire city of Jacksonville mourned the unimaginable, tragic loss of sweet, 8-year-old Cherish, Donald Smith sat locked inside a cold jail cell, awaiting his fate. If you thought a man who had just committed such a brutal, horrifying crime would be sitting in silence, completely consumed by the crushing weight of guilt and remorse, you would be dead wrong. To build their case, authorities secretly recorded Smith's jailhouse phone calls with his mother, as well as his muffled conversations with other inmates through the prison air vents. What investigators captured on those audio tapes is enough to make anyone sick to their stomach. The secret recordings completely shattered his harmless, grandfatherly facade once and for all, exposing the pure, unadulterated evil underneath. In these calls, Smith wasn't crying, he wasn't apologizing, he was bragging. He sounded practically giddy, boasting to his mother about the massive media circus surrounding his arrest. He actively reveled in his dark, new fame, proudly declaring to her that his case was way bigger than Casey Anthony. He was actually thrilled to be the center of attention on the national news, treating the horrific murder of a defenseless child like some twisted badge of honor. But the most infuriating, blood-chilling part of these undercover tapes was how the predator attempted to spin the narrative. This 61-year-old man, a lifelong, documented monster, had the sheer audacity to blame his 8-year-old victim. He blatantly lied to his mother, spinning a fabricated, delusional story that when he walked out to the parking lot, Cherish just climbed into his van on her own and stubbornly refused to leave. He claimed that because he was a known, registered predator, sheer panic set in when he realized she was in his vehicle. According to his sick, twisted logic, his brain simply took over and gave him a chilling command to eliminate the problem. He casually stated on the recording,
I was so psychotic. I was extremely violent. She had to go. I don't care how she had to go. That's my life. Stay right here. You're gonna kill me. It's your fault. I'm gonna die. I was raging.
He was literally trying to justify torturing and strangling a little girl by claiming she was a liability to his own freedom. And Smith wasn't just pure evil, he was highly calculated. Knowing full well that he was facing the death penalty in the state of Florida, he immediately started plotting his escape from justice.
I need a very simple book.
On the tapes, he can be heard directly instructing his mother to go out and buy him a copy of the DSM-5, the official diagnostic manual used by clinical psychiatrists. He desperately wanted to study the book so he could perfectly mimic the symptoms of a severe, debilitating mental illness. He knew that faking insanity was his only ticket out of the execution chamber. I gotta be honest with you guys. What struck me the most was the pure arrogance. He didn't shed a single tear for her, only for himself. In February 2018, nearly 5 agonizing years after that fateful night at Walmart, Donald Smith finally faced a jury of his peers. The courtroom was incredibly heavy, thick with unresolved tension and grief. While the defense attempted to point fingers, the prosecution came armed with a mountain of undeniable, horrifying evidence. But nothing could have prepared the jury or anyone sitting in that room for the deeply traumatic, blood-chilling testimony of Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Valerie Rao. Dr. Rao had performed thousands of autopsies throughout her lengthy career in Jacksonville, Florida. She had seen the absolute worst of humanity on a daily basis. But as she took the stand to detail the final moments of 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle, the seasoned professional completely broke down. Walking the jury through the graphic autopsy photos, she described the unimaginable torture the little girl had endured. Cherish had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the back of her head, along with defensive wounds that proved the brave 8-year-old had fought back against her attacker. Dr. Rao then detailed the horrific trauma inflicted on the child, so brutal and unimaginably violent that her anatomy was utterly destroyed. But the most devastating revelation was the ultimate cause of death. Dr. Rao explained that Cherish had been violently strangled. The deep ligature marks around her small neck were a direct, horrifying match to the exact bundle of rope Donald Smith had casually tossed into Rain's shopping cart at Walmart just hours before. The pure, calculated evil of that premeditated detail was simply too much to bear. Overcome with heavy, suffocating emotion, Dr. Rao stopped speaking. Her voice cracked, and right there on the witness stand, she began to weep. "I'm sorry," she stammered, wiping away her tears. "I have to take a break. Can I just have like 5 minutes?" The judge immediately called a recess, leaving a deeply shaken courtroom where several jurors were seen crying openly in their seats. The absolute horror of Donald Smith's crimes was undeniable. When the prosecution rested their case, the defense didn't even bother to offer a closing argument. There was nothing left to say. The jury was sent back to deliberate, and it took them exactly 15 minutes to reach a verdict. Just 15 minutes. They found Donald Smith guilty on all counts. When it came time for sentencing, Judge Mallory Cooper looked down at the 61-year-old predator who had shown zero remorse for his sickening actions. Her words cut through the silence of the courtroom like a knife, delivering the ultimate, definitive punishment. "Donald Smith," she declared with absolute, ironclad authority, "you have not only forfeited your right to live among us, you have forfeited your right to life at all. May God have mercy on your soul." Finally, after years of immense pain and unimaginable heartbreak, the scales of justice tipped in Cherish's favor. Today, Donald Smith is locked inside a tiny, concrete cage on Florida's death row, the exact place he admitted on those secret jailhouse tapes that he was absolutely terrified to go. He is rotting away in isolation, waiting for his execution date, and he will never, ever be able to lay his hands on another innocent child again. Though a death sentence can never bring sweet Cherish back to her family, they finally received the absolute justice they so rightfully deserved. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching and for all the comments. You guys make this worth it.
I actually killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. my sister.
Okay, where's your sister now?
She's in the bed.
Is she breathing?
No, I'm lost. I feel so messed up.
Okay, calm down, okay? I want you to stay on the phone with me, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's your sister's name?
Her name is Ella Bennett.
At 11:42 p.m. on a quiet Sunday night, a 911 dispatcher receives a frantic emergency call. On the other end of the line is a 13-year-old boy crying hysterically, claiming he just stabbed his 4-year-old sister because he thought she was a demon. The dispatcher pleads with him to perform CPR, and you can hear him counting chest compressions over the phone. 1, 2, 3, 4. But what no one knew was that every single tear, every frantic breath, and every counted number was a calculated, cold-blooded lie. The little girl was already dead, and the monster wasn't a demon hiding in the dark, it was her own flesh and blood. The nightmare was only just beginning. Every mother wants to believe her family is safe, but for Charity Lee, creating a peaceful home was her ultimate salvation. To grasp the devastating heartbreak of this story, you first need to understand Charity's tragic past. Having lost her own father to a brutal murder when she was just 6 years old, she spent her youth battling dark trauma and addiction. But she fought her way back to the light, determined to give her children the safe, loving upbringing she was so unfairly robbed of. Her greatest pride was her son, 13-year-old Paris Bennett. Paris wasn't just a smart kid, he was a certified prodigy with a staggering IQ of 141. Beyond his brilliant intellect, he possessed a calm, mature demeanor that put everyone at ease. To the outside world, he was the picture-perfect son and a fiercely protective older brother. His world seemed to revolve around his 4-year-old sister, Ella. Ella was the vibrant heartbeat of the family, a beautiful, boisterous, and spunky little girl who absolutely idolized her big brother. The bond between the two siblings was a joy to witness. Paris would even patiently pick out her outfits every day, while Ella looked up at him with pure, unconditional adoration. For Charity, one memory stood out as the absolute pinnacle of their love. It was a moment of pure magic that she thought cemented their unbreakable sibling bond forever. When Charity put newborn Ella in his arms, he had this huge smile on his face, and he said, "Oh mama, she's beautiful." It was a flawless illusion of a mother who had finally conquered her demons, and a brilliant boy who loved his baby sister. But the most terrifying nightmares often hide in broad daylight. Little did they know, behind that genius mind, a sinister plan was quietly taking shape.
I turned out okay.
You know, good.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation. We'll finish that tomorrow. Can I borrow your bear?
Yeah.
Thank you.
My bear is a pillow.
For now. Here, hold my owl. I met Phoenix's father when Ella died, but he didn't try to be a parent. Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins. And I wanted to be a single parent.
February 4th, 2007. It was Super Bowl Sunday, and the entire town of Abilene, Texas was buzzing with energy, glued to their television screens. Charity was exhausted, pulling a grueling double shift at a packed local sports bar. The chaos of cheering fans, clinking glasses, and the relentless rush of orders was a world away from the quiet, dimly lit Bennett home. She had hired a trusted babysitter to keep an eye on her children, taking comfort in the thought that her 13-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter were safe, warm, and secure. She was just counting down the hours until her shift ended so she could go home and kiss them goodnight.
Around midnight, the cops are at the front door. They went to the manager's office. They called my name. They told me that my daughter had been hurt. And I was like, you need to take me to Ellen now. And they were like, you can't go. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't go? You just told me that she's hurt. she needs her mother. And then they said, well, she's dead.
But inside the house, the atmosphere was quietly turning sinister. Around 10:30 p.m., Paris made his move. He didn't act out like a rebellious teenager. Instead, he weaponized his 141 IQ to play a perfectly calibrated game of psychological chess. Approaching the babysitter with that polite, mature demeanor he was known for, he spun a seamless lie. He calmly convinced her that his mother was getting off work early and that he, being the responsible older brother, was perfectly capable of watching Ella until she arrived. He was so convincing, so chillingly composed, that the babysitter didn't hesitate. She gathered her things and left. The front door clicked shut. The trap had been sprung. Paris and Ella were entirely alone. What happened next is the kind of pure, unadulterated nightmare that defies all human logic. Paris didn't suddenly snap in a fit of rage. There was no chaotic frenzy. He walked into the kitchen, his footsteps silent against the floorboards, and pulled a sharp kitchen knife from the drawer. He made his way down the hall to the bedroom, where his 4-year-old sister lay defenseless. The little girl who adored him, who thought her big brother hung the moon, never stood a chance against the monster standing in the doorway. In a span of terrifying, blood-chilling minutes, Paris brutally stabbed little Ella 17 times. The silence that followed in the house must have been deafening. But Paris didn't panic. When he finally picked up the phone at 11:42 p.m. to dial 911, it wasn't to save her life, it was to launch the next phase of his performance. The audio from that call is haunting. The dispatcher answers and Paris begins speaking in a manufactured, frantic voice.
Hello?
Abilene 911, go ahead.
I actually killed somebody.
You think you killed somebody?
No, I know I did. My sister.
Okay, where's your sister now?
She's in the bed.
Is she breathing?
No, I looked. I feel so messed up.
He weaves a web of frantic lies, gasping for air and sobbing through the receiver, flawlessly playing the role of a terrified boy waking up from a psychotic break. I gotta be honest with you, listening to a 13-year-old pretend to cry while standing over his murdered sister is one of the most chilling things I've ever heard. Does this make your blood boil too? The dispatcher, desperate to save the little girl, begged him to perform CPR, and he counted along over the phone as if he were trying to save her. But the terrifying truth of what he was actually doing in that room was about to be uncovered by the police.
I want you to put your hands on her chest. Okay, and I want you to push 30 times. I want you to count.
Okay.
All the way to 30, and then blow 2 breaths in her mouth. Okay?
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
When the first cruisers arrived at the Bennett house, red and blue lights violently slicing through the dark Texas night, officers braced themselves for an unimaginable tragedy. They expected to find a panicked, traumatized 13-year-old boy desperately trying to breathe life back into his little sister. But as they burst through the front door and moved down the hallway, the scene they encountered froze the blood in their veins. 4-year-old Ella was dead, and the devastating detail that exposed the true depth of Paris's deception. Her small, lifeless body was lying face down on the floor, the frantic counting on the 911 call, the heavy breathing, the manufactured panic. It had all been a grotesque performance. Paris hadn't even attempted to perform chest compressions. He had simply paced the room, holding the phone, directing a macabre piece of audio theater while his sister bled out just feet away from him. Miles away, Charity was still rushing through her chaotic shift at the sports bar when police officers walked through the doors. The moment they asked for her, the air was sucked out of the room. They delivered the catastrophic news, and Charity's world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Rushing to the police station,
That made no sense because I left her at home with her brother and a babysitter. And so I said, "Is my son okay?" And they said, "We have him."
Where is he? That's when everything stopped making sense.
Her mind was a whirlwind of denial, shock, and blinding grief. She thought of her son, Paris, her brilliant, gentle boy. In her mind, she was convinced he was a victim of his own broken psyche, a child who had suffered a terrifying hallucination and accidentally committed the unthinkable. She ran into that police station, fully prepared to wrap her arms around a weeping, hysterical boy and protect him from the nightmare they had both just been plunged into. But when Charity finally saw Paris, the reality was a jarring, horrifying contrast to the frantic boy on the 911 call. He wasn't crying. He wasn't trembling. When she rushed forward to embrace him, his body was stiff, completely devoid of warmth, sorrow, or remorse. There was an unnerving, chilling emptiness in his eyes. It was a frigid coldness that seeped into Charity's bones, planting the first terrifying seed of doubt in a grieving mother's heart. This wasn't the reaction of a child waking up from a hallucination. It was the eerie, deadpan calm of someone who had just finished a job. As the days passed and the investigation deepened, the forensic evidence painted a picture far more sinister than an accidental psychotic break. It became undeniably clear that Paris was in total control that night. When Charity visited Paris at the juvenile detention center, the crushing weight of reality finally set in. She had to face the monster wearing her son's face. Gathering every ounce of her shattered strength, she looked at the boy she had raised and demanded the truth.
I remember being angry all day long and thinking all day long, I want to hurt somebody if I'm going to snap. And it wasn't initially, I thought about the babysitter. I thought about going down the street and seeing somebody I knew, and thought about hurting a stranger. I don't remember exactly what point I decided it's going to be Ella. For a few moments, for a few minutes after it happened, it almost seemed like it was a dream, like it hadn't just happened. Because I had left the room and everything, and I was just hyperventilating. And then I had walked back in and I had looked and I had seen Ella and what I did. And it hit me like a punch in the gut that no, I really just did that.
When Charity confronted him about the evidence and told him she knew he was lying about the hallucinations, his entire demeanor shifted. He stopped pretending, looked his grieving mother dead in the eye, laughed, and said, "Well, it took you fucking long enough." The mask had completely slipped, revealing a void of pure, unapologetic apathy where a 13-year-old boy's soul should have been. The hallucination story was nothing but a calculated legal defense strategy dreamed up by a genius mind. This is where the story takes a dark turn, because the real reason he did it was far worse than anyone imagined. As investigators dug deeper into the digital footprint of the 13-year-old genius, the demon hallucination, defense didn't just fall apart, it completely incinerated. What they uncovered in the days and hours leading up to the tragedy was a meticulously calculated blueprint for a nightmare. There was no psychotic break, there was no sudden loss of touch with reality. Every single move Paris made on that frigid night was deliberate, orchestrated by a mind that was as brilliant as it was undeniably twisted. The horrifying truth of what Paris was doing just before the murder is enough to make anyone sick to their stomach. While his little sister was sleeping, trusting with all her heart that her beloved older brother was protecting her, Paris was sitting in the glow of his computer screen. His web history revealed a descent into total depravity. He had been consuming extreme, violent, and sadomasochistic pornography, explicitly seeking out dark, snuff-adjacent content that combined brutality with twisted gratification. He was psychologically priming himself for the bloodshed that was about to unfold in the very next room. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a cold-blooded warm-up. But the most chilling part of this entire case, the detail that will absolutely make your blood boil, is the actual motive. Why would a 13-year-old boy butcher the innocent 4-year-old sister who practically worshipped the ground he walked on? The answer wasn't jealousy, and it wasn't a sudden, uncontrollable fit of adolescent rage. It was a calculated, unapologetic act of revenge aimed directly at his mother. Years prior, Charity had suffered a brief relapse in her grueling battle against addiction. For Paris, this wasn't just a painful stumble in his mother's recovery. It was an unforgivable betrayal. A profound, festering hatred began to boil over inside his mind, and he decided that Charity needed to be punished. And with an IQ of 141, Paris didn't just want to physically hurt her, he wanted to completely obliterate her soul. Paris later confessed that he had initially considered murdering his mother when she came home from her shift at the bar. But his terrifyingly clinical logic took over. He reasoned that if he stabbed Charity, she would only suffer for 10, maybe 15 minutes before she bled out and died. That physical pain was far too fleeting. It simply wasn't enough of a punishment for what he believed she deserved. Paris wanted to inflict a lifetime of inescapable, suffocating psychological torture. So, he targeted the one thing Charity loved more than her own life, little Ella. Paris knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that by slaughtering his 4-year-old sister, he would inevitably be arrested, convicted, and locked away in a prison cell for decades, and that was the entire point of his sinister master plan. In one swift, unfathomably cruel stroke of a kitchen knife, he successfully stripped his mother of both her children. He sent Ella to the grave and himself to a concrete cage, ensuring that Charity would be left completely alone, forced to wake up every single day for the rest of her life drowning in an ocean of grief and unimaginable guilt. It takes a staggering level of malice to weaponize a mother's love and use the brutal slaughter of an innocent child merely as an instrument for revenge. Drop your take in the comments. Am I missing something? Or is this the pure definition of evil? As the legal gears began to grind, the true nature of Paris Bennett's psyche was laid bare before the court. Forensic psychologists and assessors administered intensive evaluations, including a psychopath checklist specifically designed for youth. The results were chillingly definitive. Paris displayed every classic trait of a psychopath: coldness, a total lack of empathy, and a genius-level capacity for manipulation. His assessor delivered a verdict that no parent should ever have to hear. You deserve to know that your son is a sociopath. He wasn't a child who had snapped. He was a predator who had meticulously planned a soul-crushing revenge. The weight of this revelation fell entirely on Charity Lee. She was trapped in a suffocating psychological limbo, a mother whose heart was being torn in two opposite directions. When she spoke to the district attorney, she had to be the mother of the 4-year-old victim, Ella. When she spoke to the defense, she had to be the mother of the 13-year-old perpetrator, Paris. This impossible duality pushed her to the very brink of sanity as she struggled to reconcile her love for the son she raised with her grief for the daughter he slaughtered.
But you love her?
Yes, I do.
Do you think you understand what love is? And are you capable?
I don't really know how to answer that question. And I'm not saying that to be difficult or stubborn, but it's not simple, so I can't just point at something and say, okay, that's love. I recognize it easily, and I feel that.
To me, this question is a no-brainer. This hurts. That there is at least one thing he should be able to point at and say, that's love. And that's the fact that I'm still here and have supported him throughout this process. Because my feelings for him are very complex, but I can very easily say that's love.
The tension reached a breaking point on August 15, 2007, the day of the trial. The courtroom in Abilene was thick with a palpable sense of unease and public judgment. Charity faced the brunt of the community's cruelty. Neighbors and strangers alike whispered that she was the mother who had created a monster. In a visual representation of her internal agony, Charity found she couldn't choose a side to sit on in the courtroom, she couldn't stand with the prosecution and abandon her son, nor could she sit with the defense and betray her daughter. A bailiff eventually had to bring her a single chair to sit in the middle of the aisle, a solitary figure isolated by a tragedy that defied human comprehension. From that lonely seat, Charity made the most agonizing decision of her life. She didn't plead for mercy or attempt to get Paris off the hook. Instead, she stood before the judge and read a prepared statement advocating for her son's incarceration. "I truly feel my son is dangerous," she stated, on that if he was released, I'd be in danger or somebody else could get hurt. She was a mother asking the state to lock away her only living child to ensure he could never hurt anyone again. The final gavel fell with a heavy thud. Paris Bennett pleaded guilty to capital murder in juvenile court. Because he was only 13 at the time of the crime, he was ineligible for the death penalty. Instead, he received the absolute maximum sentence allowed by Texas law for a juvenile: 40 years in prison. Justice was served in the eyes of the law, but for Charity, there was no victory. As she watched her son be led away to spend the majority of his life behind bars, she realized she had lost both her children in one fell swoop, just as Paris had intended. The monster would be contained, but the mother would be left to wander the ruins of the perfect life he had so cold-bloodedly destroyed. For most parents, putting their child behind bars would be the tragic end of the story. But for Charity Lee, the prison sentence was merely the beginning of a new, agonizing chapter of psychological warfare. Even locked inside a maximum security facility, Paris Bennett maintained a suffocating grip on his mother's life. For over a decade, he used her unwavering, unconditional love as a weapon, continuing to relentlessly torment her from the other side of the visitation glass. Paris was a master manipulator, and he knew exactly how to keep Charity trapped in his twisted web. Over the years, he would slowly drip-feed her horrific new details about the night he murdered 4-year-old Ella, constantly changing his story just to torture her mind. The depth of his cold-blooded nature was put on full display during a documentary interview years later, where he casually revealed the sinister truth behind his 911 call. Looking directly into the camera with dead, emotionless eyes, Paris admitted that he hadn't just faked his panic, he had actually left the phone, walked into an entirely different room, and simply counted numbers out loud to make the frantic dispatcher believe he was performing CPR on his dying sister. It was a calculated performance designed to mock the very concept of human empathy. But the torment wasn't strictly psychological. During one horrifying visit to the prison, the terrifying monster Charity had given birth to physically resurfaced. In a sudden, explosive fit of rage, Paris violently flipped the heavy visitation table and lunged at his own mother. He pinned Charity against the wall, his hands wrapped tightly around her throat, violently choking her and cutting off her air supply. In that terrifying, breathless moment, Charity honestly believed the son she was trying so desperately to love was going to finish what he started and kill her right there in the prison. He eventually eased off and let her go, but the terrifying message was loud and clear: the predator was still alive and well inside him. Despite the physical attacks, the shifting stories, and the relentless emotional torture, Charity kept going back. She had made a promise to love her son unconditionally, bearing the unimaginable weight of his sins on her own shoulders. What struck me the most was Charity's relentless capacity to love, but thank God she finally realized she couldn't save him. The ultimate breaking point didn't come from a sudden epiphany, it came from a horrifying reality check. In January 2021, after 14 years of enduring his twisted games, Charity finally hit her absolute limit. Paris, now 27 years old, had started dating someone from the outside. But this wasn't just a pen pal seeking a connection. Paris was romantically involved with a woman who was currently out on bond, awaiting trial for allegedly planning a mass shooting. For Charity, the fragile illusion completely shattered. The troubled 13-year-old boy she had been desperately trying to rehabilitate was gone forever, replaced by a 27-year-old man who was actively seeking out the darkest, most violent corners of society. He wasn't a victim of a broken mind seeking redemption, he was a psychopath reveling in the chaos. The boundary had been irreparably crossed. Realizing that the monster could never be cured, Charity finally made the excruciating but necessary decision to walk away, severing all contact with her son to protect herself and the new life she was trying to build. When you sever ties with a monster, the nightmare doesn't just evaporate overnight. For Charity Lee, finally cutting off all contact with Paris wasn't just a boundary, it was an act of survival. But the reality of the criminal justice system meant that her nightmare had an expiration date, and it was fast approaching. While Paris had been sentenced to 40 years behind bars, the chilling truth is that he will be eligible for parole as early as 2027. Knowing that the sociopath who butchered her daughter could potentially walk free is enough to paralyze anyone with fear. But Charity is no longer the broken, grieving mother weeping in the back of a police cruiser. She has transformed into an absolute warrior. Understanding exactly what her eldest son is capable of, she refused to become a sitting duck. Charity went out and legally purchased a firearm. She spent grueling hours at the shooting range, learning how to handle the weapon with absolute, lethal precision. She has made it terrifyingly clear, if the parole board ever makes the catastrophic mistake of releasing Paris back into society, she is fully prepared. She will pack up her youngest son, Phoenix, legally change their identities, and vanish into the shadows. She will do whatever it takes to ensure Paris never gets the chance to finish the sick, twisted revenge plot he started all those years ago. There is a vital, harsh educational lesson we all need to take away from this tragedy. Cases like Paris Bennett force us to confront a terrifying reality about the human mind. Sometimes, the capacity for profound evil is just hardwired. As a society, we often want to point fingers at the parents, the video games, or the environment. But psychopathy and profound antisocial personality disorders are complex, deeply ingrained psychological anomalies. When a child exhibits extreme red flags like obsessing over violence, demonstrating zero empathy, or violently manipulating their environment, we cannot just brush it off as a phase. We desperately need a mental health infrastructure and a juvenile justice system that takes these warning signs seriously, intervening aggressively before a family has to wake up to a blood-soaked crime scene. Love is powerful, but love alone cannot cure a psychopath. Proper clinical intervention and securing the safety of the public must always come first. But Charity didn't just arm herself with a weapon, she armed herself with a profound, unyielding purpose. She refused to let her daughter's memory be defined by the brutal, blood-chilling way she was taken from this world. To honor her little girl, Charity established the Ella Foundation. She took the shattered pieces of her heart and dedicated her entire life to advocating for victims of violence and fighting for children battling severe mental illnesses. She travels, speaks, and educates, turning her unimaginable trauma into a lifeline for others. Little Ella didn't get the chance to grow up, to go to prom, or to chase her dreams.
Today we're going to talk about healthy boundaries. I want everybody to stand up. Crystal, tell me something that you're upset or feeling stressed over right now. CPS. Valerie, comfort Crystal. It'll be okay. Was that comforting? Really?
The night that Ella died, I made her a promise that something meaningful would come out of her death.
I tell myself that it's okay to enjoy life, but there's always that thought in the back of my mind, well, Ella's not here to enjoy it with me. So I set up the Ella Foundation to prevent violence by sharing our story. Focus on the entire dynamic. We are done. Next week we go back to family.
But the tragic lessons learned from her story and the relentless work of the foundation built in her name have undeniably saved other families from enduring this exact same horror. Ella's physical life was stolen, but her legacy is one of healing light and enduring love. If you appreciate these deep dives and want to support the channel, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. It helps us keep shining a light on these important stories, and we can't do it without you. Finally, after years of unimaginable pain, Charity took her power back. The monster remains behind bars where he belongs, and justice is served. What do you guys think? Does this ending bring you any sense of relief? I'll keep digging if there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching and for all the comments. You guys make this worth it.